Keeps on back to shape my smile. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever the case may be, for all of you listening out there across the crazy planet Earth. Welcome to Vestiges After Dark. And I am your host, Bishop Brian Willett, coming to you from the deep woods of Western Georgia on this April 18th, 2023. Tonight we talk about the negative near-death experience with an individual who has experienced it firsthand and has conducted an amazing amount of research on this. It's going to be a very interesting, perhaps even slightly disturbing show. We'll see what he has to tell us and teach us about this phenomenon. It's actually more common than you might think. And, well, it's going to be intriguing. Get your questions ready. We'll be answering them. But first, in the first hour, we will be doing questions from the ether. Your questions answered in just a moment. Don't go away. Everybody, I hope you all had a wonderful Holy Week and Easter Sunday. We're still right in the beginnings of the Easter season, and it's my second favorite time of year. So I'm enjoying myself right now. I get a little bit of a break now, because Holy Week is perhaps the most demanding, most stressful part of the year for a bishop, and we try to offer every possible liturgy that we can through that season, through that week at least, and through the season of Lent as well. I certainly offered more masses during Lent than I normally would, private masses, which is a really nice thing, actually. It's something I should do more of, honestly. Private masses, I think, are a wonderful way to experience the depth of the relationship that clergy has with God. So it's something I should do more of. I wish I wasn't so busy, but you make time for things like this. So, and speaking of making time for things, we have Jamie Wolf with us as usual, and she has one of my personal favorite scotches. I actually like the 18 slightly more than the 16, but the 16 is nothing to shake a stick at. It's actually fantastic. What do we have tonight?
Another impulse purchase that
this is a good impulse.
I had no idea that this is one of his favorites.
No, this is the
Balvenie 16-year French oak.
Yeah, I don't drink a lot of Highland or Speyside.
See, I'm a Speyside girl, so
and I don't drink a lot of Speyside and Highland. Tracy loves Speyside. I will, if I'm doing that region, I prefer the Highland.
You did say you wanted the Jamie pour?
You can give me the Jamie pour on this one because I absolutely...
Which is basically a dram and a half.
Sometimes it's more than that. That's perfect for tonight.
Sometimes.
This will get me through the whole thing. So
I've got to drive.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So this is 16 years in American oak casks.
It's a very
And then
sweet,
finished in a French wine cask.
It's a very sweet scotch, but it's also very... well, I mean, it's got complexity. There's a hint of smoke in there, like most Highland scotches. If you really pay attention, that's what really, for me, even though, Speyside is technically Highland, the Speyside tends to not be smoky at all, whereas Highland allows for this. And there is just a hint in this one. You can even smell it, but it smells like candy to me.
I can definitely taste the smoke and the honey.
Because I'm an Isla person.
Yeah, definitely.
I prefer Isla.
I am not.
Yeah, but you can taste the sea.
Yeah.
There's a saltiness too.
There's a little bit of a ocean kind of a taste to it. But
The majority of it is caramel, sugar, candy,
vanilla,
and a hint of vanilla
little
too.
ginger.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's a good one. Thank you for sharing it,
Balvenie.
Balvenie. Yeah,
Haven't had a bad one yet, y'all.
no. I mean, honestly, I'd say the 16 and the 18 are better than even the cigar malt of Dalmore, and I love Dalmore.
Dalmore's my favorite.
But Dalmore cigar malt's more money than this.
This is true.
Yeah.
Yeah, they shot up.
They did.
They're getting proud of their stuff.
They're getting a little.
Maybe
little
we shouldn't be
cocky.
doing this free advertising anymore.
I know, right? They should pay us for this.
Right?
But see, I love Scotch too much, so I don't give a shit. You know.
I don't either. I'm going to get it regardless. I'll drink it regardless.
That's right. Okay. Well, we have tonight we've got Brandon Milam and Father Chris Yates joining us. How are you both doing? Yeah, the whole crew's here tonight.
Doing pretty good. Love the fact that Vestiges is now back. My whole week, like my past couple of weeks, was just in a loop because I was like, yeah, Vestiges is Tuesday. Then I realized, wait, no, Vestiges isn't this Tuesday.
That's right. Yes,
No,
it gets crazy. It's going to get crazy again because we'll have one next week, but then we won't have one for 2 more weeks. So you're going to be in the abyss for a while, Brandon. I hate to say it. How are you doing tonight, Father Chris?
I'm doing well, although you're killing me with this talk of whiskey because
you're right in the heart of Scotland right now, aren't you?
I am actually in Edinburgh tonight.
I mean,
what are you waiting on?
Well, because I insisted on going to Durham Cathedral on the way here, and so we spent a bit too much time there. And then when we got here, we had to eat dinner, and then when we went to find a shop to buy some whiskey, they were all closed.
Oh no!
Yeah, things close early in Edinburgh, don't they?
They do.
Yeah, like unusually so for a large
roll up
city.
the sidewalks.
Yeah. I understand that. I mean, I've been told that if you want to do any shopping in Edinburgh, make sure you do it before the sun goes down.
Well, I'll be doing it before the sun comes up in the morning. Let me tell you. So so it's murder. I'm in the whiskey capital of the world.
Now I understand Glasgow's doesn't close as early. It's more like the nightlife is more out that way.
We'll be there later in the week.
Are you going to Islay? Are you going to go all the way?
No. Although when we went last time I spoke to you, I was in Dublin, and after that we went up to Northern Ireland, to Londonderry and the Antrim coast, and you can see Islay.
You can see the edge of it, right? It's like when we go down to as Americans when we go down to Key West on a very clear day, you can see the tip of Cuba. On a very clear day, which is really kind of funny for us because, the United States hasn't had a good relationship with Cuba for more than like 50, 60 years. So it's really it's kind of funny to be able to see it so close like that. But I guess there's places in Alaska where you can see Russia. So
yeah,
I did go to a little place that I know Jamie knows called Bushmills.
Oh yeah,
the Bushmills.
Very familiar.
Which is the oldest distillery in the UK.
Yeah.
And so I've had a bit of that, but I might get out to Islay. It's touch and go because I've got a friend.
That's hard. It's hard. It's not like you can fly in, but the ferry you got to kind of schedule, and they don't always run.
Time it.
You got to time it right. Yeah.
So I might make it, but if not, because I've got a friend on Holy Loch who's a Russian Orthodox monk, Hiram monk. So
nice.
I'm hoping to go and see him as well. And then I've got to see my friend in Perth as well, which is further north on the East Coast.
Yeah.
I'll certainly.
You can do it. You can do it.
Right into the heart of space side up there.
Yes.
Well, I'll probably be behind you either next year or the year after that. I haven't decided yet. I think I might do.
Well, let me know. I'll meet you there.
I'm working on Spain and Portugal.
I'd love to go, and you can take me around.
That's
Portugal would be fun. Go see
on my list.
the port.
Ireland's still number one right now.
The port vineyards.
Ireland and Scotland.
I've been to Portugal. You gotta be careful in Portugal. It's a pretty crime-ridden nation.
Is it?
Drugs are out of control.
I'll be just fine.
You can have a great time in Portugal. You just got to plan it. Yeah.
Duly noted.
I think my next trip to Europe will be France, because I want to immerse myself in Bordeaux and Burgundy for a couple weeks.
1996.
But after that, it's going to be probably Scotland, I think. Yeah.
But you've got to come to Australia too.
I do.
Australia's been on my wish list for 30 years.
Yeah. Now the gates have been broken, like Jesus
The gates have been
emerging
kicked
from
open.
the gate, kicking open the gates
We are
to
on the doorstep of the Hunter Valley.
Back
we
to
grow
normal
a lot
life.
of wine up there. We can go to the vineyards. We'd have a great time.
I'm sure they're feeling quite silly now about all that stuff over the last 3 years, aren't they?
I'd still be kind of mad about it. I am mad
It's
about
almost
it.
as though it never happened.
Yeah,
No
I'm
one
sure.
talks
Everyone wants
about
to pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah.
The good news is I don't think you'll ever be able to dupe any generation that's alive today that lived through it. I think we've got a few years where we have to worry about it again, and I'll probably be dead by then. So, yeah. Anyway, let's get started tonight with questions from the ether. What do we have? What do you have for us tonight, Brandon?
All right. So the first question comes from Laura from the network. She asks, "Is donating my body to science at death morally wrong?"
That's a good one. Now, this is where it gets kind of almost like it depends on who you ask. I'm going to give a theological answer. I'm also going to give a metaphysical one. And I think I'll start with the metaphysical because I think that's the one that really matters in this sense. Because, when you bring in theology, it's really what you believe. But when you bring in metaphysics, it's kind of what is, whether you know it or not. Okay, so metaphysics might not be something you fully understand, but that not understanding it doesn't change the fact that this is how the way things work on that metaphysical level. And that's exactly where this is. So here's the problem with organ donation. Okay. And I think we've even talked about this on this show before, but it's been a while. It's been a long time since we've covered it. Not everyone has seen every of the
That's
the
good to
earlier
touch base
shows.
because it's a very valid question.
Well, it's a question that comes up a lot. So I don't mind re-answering questions that are common like this. So essentially, there is this thing called archetypal resonance. And there are certain elements or energy systems that we're compatible with and some that we're not. Okay. So when you donate your organs, you're giving a part of your energy stream to someone else. And this is the same for blood transfusion too, by the way. Okay. Although it doesn't have as much of an impact in the same way. Because you're recycling your blood constantly while you're alive.
I was a recipient of a lot of blood.
Yeah,
during my accident,
but the blood that you got in your accident's not in you anymore.
No, it's
been
cycled out.
Yeah,
but I
cycles out.
had some weird stuff going on.
I'm sure
for a
it did
while.
for the time that you have it.
Right.
But if you get a liver transplant, that's with you forever.
That's forever. Yep.
And what you find, and even science will recognize this. Okay, even doctors will tell you this. Even people that have had been the recipients of organ donation will tell you this. They change. It changes them. The energy from the other person intermixes with who they are, and they become something new. And they'll start to have memories, and they'll start to have feelings, and personalities will even change.
There's been documentaries on this.
There has been.
Yeah.
And if there's a dissonance between your vibratory rate and the one of the recipients, or let me make it more relevant. Let's say you're the recipient. If the donor has a very different energy stream than the one that you're compatible with, that's not going to be good for you spiritually. And that's what you really need to be thinking about in these kinds of situations is what are the long-term spiritual ramifications of this? Now, obviously, science isn't going to think about that, but they will recognize that there are neurological cells in organs, and they do have memory. They do actually process part of the thing that we call consciousness. It's not all in your head. It's actually not all in your brain. All your nerves are aware in certain ways, and those things do contain memories, and they can become part of you. And it's not really too much of a problem physically if the energy is compatible, but it's very problematic if it's not compatible, and spiritually can be disastrous. So I advise against it. My personal opinion is, and I know this is an unpopular one, but my personal contention, I'm not going to call it an opinion. It's an educated philosophical contention. Let's call it that. That if you are dying or become terminally ill with a disease that could be cured potentially or temporarily by an organ donation, I say accept your fate. Don't try to play God and extend your life any longer than than is what would be natural for that circumstance. That's how I feel about it. And that's how strongly I feel about it because of these metaphysical issues. Now, the church, let's talk about it from a religious vantage point. There are bishops in the church that are all for it. There are bishops in the church that are dead set against it. And most of the bishops in the church that are dead set against it are all Orthodox. So that should tell you something, because the Orthodox are a lot more metaphysical.
Yeah.
All right. They understand metaphysics a lot better. Well, maybe not. They don't try to understand it. What they try to do is they try to accept it. They accept the fate of it. They realize there's mysteries. Okay. Catholic Church can be very metaphysical too, but they try to explain it away. But I think if you were to actually talk to Thomas Aquinas and some of these, intellectual giants of metaphysics in the church, I think, if things like this had existed back then, I think there'd be cause for concern among them. The Orthodox do not go for it, and largely, and Catholics are on the fence. I personally think it's too much God playing. So if I'm going to give you my moral opinion, now this is an opinion, not a contention. If I'm going to give you my moral opinion, I'm going to tell you that it's problematic from the vantage point of it just being too much like playing God. All right, those organs were not created for you. All right, they were created for the person that they were built within. And then you get into things like the theology of the resurrection of the dead. So you could say that, okay, well, I guess if you really want to get technical, that liver that you were donated could get put back into the person, and the liver that caused you to die would regrow inside you, and you'd be back whole again. I mean, I guess that's how it would work. I mean, no one really knows, right? But we do know that at the resurrection of the dead, the body will be reconstituted in its whole and entire state. And I'm not so sure we're supposed to be mixing that stuff. Okay, so I'm against it in the same way that I'm against keeping ashes in your house, in the same way that I'm against mingling ashes among other things that don't belong together. I just think it's shady ground. Father Chris, what's your views on it?
I think my initial reaction to the question, is it morally wrong? The answer is no, it's not morally wrong. I think that, but what I would have said is what you said, which is to say, but there are theological and metaphysical reasons to
consider
not go along with it.
Yeah.
But I don't think I would call somebody who.
No, I don't think they're going to go to hell for it. I mean, that, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So it depends what you mean by morally wrong. I get, so that's why I was shaking my head going, no, it's not morally wrong.
Yeah.
But but I'm not an organ donor.
Although I would say that I think some Orthodox bishops might consider it morally wrong.
I think you might be right, and I happen to know some Orthodox bishops, so I'm keen to ask them that question.
Yeah, why don't you ask them, and next time, when you have the information, report back and let us know what they have said directly. Because,
and if I was under their jurisdiction, I'd do as they told me.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think ultimately it's a personal choice. I don't think it's something that it's not sinful in the sense of something that's going to condemn you, but I do think it does pose spiritual problems.
Like many questions about things that have become possible because of human endeavor and technology and creativity.
Correct.
We present ourselves with moral dilemma because we can do things that we didn't used to be able to do.
We're growing organs in petri dishes now.
Reaching. That's correct. We're reaching a point now where, when you look at the greats like Thomas Aquinas, who I mentioned earlier, he was coming around that time of the Renaissance, right? He was coming into that time when world was changing. That was the last time the world really saw dramatic shift. I guess you could say the Industrial Revolution, but prior to that would have been the Renaissance. Things were pretty much the same from the Renaissance to the Industrial Revolution, give or take a few minor things. And prior to the Renaissance, from the birth of Christianity, life hadn't changed terribly much outside of just the fact that the Roman Empire collapsed and things became slightly more primitive. Although I think the Dark Ages are exaggerated. I don't think they were as dark as they.
Certainly.
Yeah,
it's a bad description.
It is a bad description.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a great amount of art and literature and wonderful things that came out of the so-called Dark Ages. But I mean, it was
part of that is because the British Isles in particular were thoroughly Orthodox, and of course, the Norman invasion sponsored by the papacy was to assert Roman Catholic control over the British Isles, and therefore everything that went before it must have just been dark and ignorant and all of those things, which of course they weren't.
Right. So, not quite in the way it's kind of seen as just a time of just like the barbarians are just taking over. I mean, it wasn't quite like that, but so when you look at the different eras or eons in our history of Western civilization, you find that the Renaissance was like first major shift into the modern era, into modernity. I mean, it's kind of the origin of the Illuminati and all of that stuff. So I think when you look at it from that vantage point, God gave us great minds like Thomas Aquinas to deal with it. I think we're now entering in such a time now where we're going to need great minds to deal with it, because the Bible could not have been written to anticipate the kinds of things that we're facing today, any more than the Bible was written to face the kind of things that the Renaissance presented, which is why Thomas Aquinas and people like him came along through the inspiration of God to kind of guide the church through the change, which is, I think, his role.
It's why Christ left us with a church, not a Bible.
Exactly. He did. He left us with a church, not a Bible. That's right.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
I think that the other thing to say, because I think you're right about that, the other thing to say is, St. Thomas Aquinas did write, but actually it took a long time for those writings to take effect. I mean, again, part of the technological age is that we're so instant and that we want an instant definitive answer from the church, and actually that's not how the church operates. The church operates in a hermeneutic, right?
Yeah.
So actually you're not going to get a definitive answer because and it's not because they're squibbing or it's not that the people in the church are unsure about their faith. It's just to say that these are big ideas, and we've got some big ideas to enter into that discourse, and we'll only know really as that discourse unravels a clear way, and I think that's how the church should operate, and it's interesting because critics of the church often say, you've got these rigid views on X, Y, and Z, and why don't you change and blah, blah, blah. But actually it's far more responsible to act in this way, where you say, actually, the fourth dimension of time, we're not worried about that in the life of the church.
Yeah.
The Orthodox are like that, right?
They are. I mean, they're more like that than the Catholics are, for sure. I mean, I think they do it far better than the Catholics do.
They do almost everything better than the Catholics do.
Well, it's true, because they just accept the mysteries for what they are. They don't try to get into these long, complicated mind traps. I call them mind traps because, I mean, if you really get into some of the philosophizing of the church, you can put yourself into these contradictory corners where I think that's where scrupulosity comes from, honestly. And you don't find a lot of scrupulosity in Orthodox people. You don't.
Well, it also opened the door to the Protestant Reformation, because the questions that Protestants asked were actually legitimate questions.
It's true.
So, Martin Luther, if the Bishop of Rome can free souls from purgatory, why does he do it for money and not out of Christian love?
Right.
These questions are killer questions. Of course.
Yeah.
And so,
but I will say this. Given all of the flaws of Catholicism and all the wonderful things of Orthodoxy,
she's our mother.
I would say that. Well, yes, I would say that the Catholic Church is far more open and less tribal than Orthodoxy, and I think that's a huge notch in its favor.
Not tribal. It's just to say it's less tribal.
Less tribal. Yeah, I mean it is. It has tribal. Right. It has It does have that. I mean, but it's not anywhere near as severe as what you see in Orthodoxy. I mean, there's true hatred between Russian and Greek Orthodoxy in certain places. I mean, look at the difference between Russian and Ukrainian Orthodoxy. I mean, it gets vicious. I mean, they kill each other. Look at what happens at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre almost every single Holy Week. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if there was a fight this year, but there usually is.
Well, the Israeli government restricted the numbers at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre this year.
Oh, did they? That's interesting.
Well, they tried to. I mean, rightly. Most Christians ignored it, but there was certainly a massive reduction. Yeah. And so, who knows? I have been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I've been inside the sepulchre when Mass.
Did you start a fight? Did you start a fight?
No, there were no fights. But before we could start to celebrate Mass, we had to wait for the Armenian Orthodox to have finished their matins chanting, and it's absolutely I mean we're from another country and not familiar with it. And we're like, we'll just start setting up, and they were like, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do it. See, I'm thinking that you were the guy that moved the ladder, weren't you?
No, I don't go near ladders. I'm an impractical man.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
I do. Yeah,
remember how that was like the end of the world?
The status quo. Yeah, that's where we use the term status quo from that.
From that. Yeah. Somebody moved that damn ladder, and man, it was Armageddon time.
Boys,
so I hope that answers the question. Brandon, what's our next one?
All right, so our next question comes from Marina.
Okay.
She asks, I've heard of paranormal experiences where people have seen an apparition of a person that is still living. Have you encountered this before?
Okay, so yes. I mean, I can't say that. I mean, I haven't. I've encountered it in a different kind of way. I've encountered it as a doppelganger.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one way in which this type of phenomenon can manifest. And there was a case we did several years ago. Were you with the team at that time?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I remember it.
So there was this particular house, and I've talked about it before. This particular house on the lower level had a gymnasium. It was a very large home, and it had a gymnasium that had all the walls lined in mirrors.
All the mirrors facing each other.
Correct. And that's a typical thing that you see in weightlifting rooms and stuff. So people can, I guess, watch their muscles grow. I don't know what they're doing, but
it's to check your form.
Okay, well there you go. I mean, I'm not into those kinds of things. Okay, I'd rather eat. So the kitchen's more important to me than that. But anyway, it was all mirrors, and the owner, well, not the owner, but the person who was living in the house at the time had used the room as a meditation chamber, which was a big mistake because when you have mirrors facing each other like that, it's an amplification of energy, and things can go wrong with it. Okay, things can go wrong. And so a lot of the source of the issues in this particular investigation were arising from that room. Big surprise. And so we went down there to do some investigation, EVP, that kind of thing. And we had the cameras pointing in different directions with different types of cameras, a full spectrum, I think we had the...
Did we have the SLS?
I think we had the SLS. Yeah, I think we did, and we had just a regular infrared. Yeah. So we had infrared, SLS, full spectrum in different corners of the room, and I was in the center of the room, trying to make contact with whatever was in there, and long story short, while I was in the midst of doing this, my reflection behind me, so understand that, there's a mirror behind me and I'm facing this way, which means you'll see the back of my head in the mirror. So the camera in front of me was pointing at the mirror and me in front of it. And the reflection of me, which is the back of my head, turned around and looked forward during this, which should not happen, because in order for that to happen, I'd have to turn around and put my back to the camera in the reflection. You have to see that in the reflection, right? So my reflection turned around, and there was another incident, if I recall correctly, in that house where somebody thought I was up there. They were talking to me, and I wasn't up there.
Yeah, we thought you were upstairs.
Correct.
But you weren't. You were still in that room.
That's what it was.
And then after the doppelganger incident, one of the investigators come running up to the bedroom where we were trying to
That's what it
contact. And he's like, I don't know what the hell I just saw, but I need a cigarette. Who's got a cigarette? And I'm like, dude, what? He's like, oh, you don't want to know.
It unsettled him. I
It
mean,
really
understandably
unsettled him.
so.
He saw it happen. I mean, that would be creepy as hell.
And it was. I mean, I'm sure.
Weird energy in that room, too.
I don't think you can, unfortunately, see it on the camera because I think it was distorted, which is a very typical thing. When this type of stuff happens, it's hard to record for some reason. The camera fails or something fails. So I don't think we ever were able to capture that. Know. But that's an experience I had. But that's more of a doppelganger experience. So there are incidents, I mean, even in the church, even in the lore of the church, there are saints that have the gift of bilocation. In which case there have been priests that have been, people have seen them saying mass while people go into the confessional, and the priest hearing their confession is the same guy that's up saying mass at the same time. That's happened. There's been reports of that. There's even been triple bilocation. The guy saying mass, the guy hearing confession, and also at a hospital several miles away giving last rites.
It'd be very useful if you could do it on demand.
I mean, wouldn't it be nice, But I mean, I guess if, there's never been enough priests, Father. So that's what's going on here.
They get enough for their money out of us, don't you worry. They don't need to do 3 times the work.
There you go.
But I can tell you a story about, again, a hieromonk, an Orthodox monk there was an old couple, they were an American couple, the Yoda was their surname. There you go.
Yoda, as in like the little alien?
That's outstanding.
And they were like nearly, I think they were 90 odd, and they'd become Orthodox. They converted, and they were in their room once, and this hieromonk appeared to them, who lived in the Middle East. And spoke with them, and they couldn't figure it out, and a little while later, they went there to visit him. I think he was in Syria. He couldn't do it now. And they went to see him in Syria, and they're like, how did you appear to us? And in front of them, he basically just, like, he was still there, but he sort of phased, he was not there.
Not totally there.
Like went transparent.
Yeah. And then he came, and he did it briefly, and then he said, now do you understand?
Wow. That's an interesting story. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I mean, the church is full of these kinds of things. So, again, that's a little bit different than what Marina's asking here. So there's a third possibility. This is not so much within the realm of theological conversation, but more in the realm of metaphysical conversation. But Theosophy has on numerous occasions has reported the ability of certain people to be able to astrally project themselves into other environments where they will appear to the people that are there as a ghost, right? While they're in a astral projection state. So, and I would say there's even a fourth possibility. So the first one is doppelganger. The second one is bilocation. The third one is this one I just mentioned. And the fourth one could maybe be not an astral projection so much, but a tulpa or thought form that is being projected out, a concept of oneself that's separating in some kind of way. Because as I've said so many times, and my students are probably sick of hearing it, we as entities think of ourselves as one thing. We are anything but one thing. Even science can agree with that statement. They might be like, what are you talking about? Well, I mean, how many cells are in your body? Each one of them is an individual life form. They all combine together to create what we call an organism, but each one is its own life form. Okay. So even biologically, you are what you think of yourself as is a combination of countless individual life forms. So spiritually, we're not different. We're made up of several different types of spiritual energy, of which can separate from us for various reasons, traumas, other things that can cause it. And this is where the third type of demon that you've heard me talk about in demonology, the created, otherwise known as an egregore, if others can see it, or a thought form in the more occult sense. Although typically when people refer to thought forms, they're mostly talking about things that you are creating in a specific ritual sense, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. It can be an accident. It can be something you do accidentally, unconsciously, and that can produce this. So to answer the question, yes, it can happen. Yes, I've heard of it. Yes, I've experienced the doppelganger version. It's all relatively explainable and somewhat benign. Even the bilocation report is actually quite benign. Mm-hmm. It's really just God giving the grace of the church. That's all he's doing. He's short some guy, so he multiplies one individual to do it. That's all it is. It's a little miracle to make it possible.
And in the case of the monk, it meant he could exert his prayerful ministry beyond the bounds of his monastery.
Yeah, which is what we're called to be and do. I mean, contemplative monasticism is wonderful, but it's a little bit limiting sometimes, in the sense that we are called to be out there, to putting ourselves out there, to be available. And in the monastery, people have to come to you, which is not a bad thing. And there's definitely a calling for that. And I really do, and I've said this before, the prayers of the monks are really what I think keep the stability of the world in check. I think if we were to lose the monasteries, then you'll really see hell break loose on earth. I really do.
Well, I think the disruption in Syria in particular,
and
obviously it's not restricted to that nation, but I think we've seen the sort of instability that's come about since those
have been changed.
Those monasteries have been affected and diverted from their tasks.
It's true. When I was a Melkite, the pastor of my church was a Syrian. And Syria wasn't in the condition it is in now back then. You could still travel there relatively safely. But it's not the same country anymore.
Oh, absolutely not.
No.
Yeah.
And the Assyrians are the last group that pray in Aramaic.
It's true. They are. Yeah. It's becoming a dead language.
Christ's language, yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's sad. It's very sad. But the world moves on. And I guess there's some kind of direction and flow to that. So, God God seems to like change. I think we think of God as this unchanging thing, but maybe that's why he likes it, because he can't change.
God is unchanging, but we have to change.
We have to change. And so God actually likes change and embraces change, and we should too, I guess. So does that answer the question, Brandon?
I believe it does. At least it would if I asked it.
Okay, good. What's next?
So this third question comes from me, but it requires a little bit of a kind of a short story to explain my question.
Okay.
So last year, I believe it was back in September, we had done a case in Georgia where we had to call in a shaman. Last I heard, it has been resolved, or at least the activity has died down tremendously. But here recently, in the past couple months, every investigation we have done, there has been what we believe to be the same entity threatening one member in particular. Mm-hmm. Like, we'll do like the Estes session, for example, and it's just always the same MO. Like, where are you? Behind you. It just like the answers it gives is exactly the same every time. Mm-hmm. And of course, we get like, excuse my language, like actually last Friday, I was kind of not threatening it, slightly antagonizing it, saying that
it's called provoking, Brandon. It's okay.
it's also called getting your Zach Bagans on. I mean.
Yeah.
Well, I did it a little differently.
Wigging out.
I didn't start provoking it. I just said, do you need to speak with my bishop friend? Do I need to get him down? Mm-hmm. And apparently it did not like that, because through the Estes, it said directly to me, fuck you. Mm-hmm. So this whole story is to kind of set up this question. When you're dealing with an entity, what do you do to get its name? And is the method different between when a person is possessed versus you're just confronting the entity and no possession is taking place?
Well, there is no definitive way to get a demonic name outside of the solemn rite of exorcism, where it actually contains that as an element of the rite itself. And the entire rite.
It needs vocal cords of a possessed person to say them.
It does, right. And so the rite of exorcism, the solemn rite, is basically a very long, arduous rite for a reason. It's designed not for your sake. It's designed to wear that demonic presence down to the point that it just gives in and then tells you whatever you want. And once you have the name of a thing, you can control that thing. You have a certain amount of control over it. So getting the name is important. It's an occult law. This is where the church and the occult definitely intersect, because they won't call it that, but that's exactly what it is. And anybody that's involved in occult evocation already knows that you can't do squat with an entity until you have its name. It won't obey you until you have its name, and the demonic follows this rule. Okay, so the whole rite of exorcism is not so much about the solemn rite, the length of it, the majority of it is not about liberating the victim. It's about weakening the demon to the point that you can just get it out of there at that point. And that's how we get the name of a demon. There is no other way to do that outside of the solemn rite of exorcism. As far as other kinds of things, you just have to ask. And if it doesn't want to tell you, it's not going to. There might be other ways to trick it, or you might be able to make deals like the Jewish exorcists do with Dybbuk's. But I wouldn't recommend that kind of thing unless you really know what you're doing. So I would leave that to those that deal with that sort of thing. It's not many that do. Not many Jewish rabbis deal with that.
I also think it's not the best way to deal with it at all.
Yeah.
I mean, Christians are different from Jews. I mean, although I love my Jewish brothers. I mean, we believe that part of the reason God allows these things is to give us a share in the role of condemning these things to hell if they're evil. And so I'm sorry to interrupt, but I actually think there's something here. I mean, I'm in an Airbnb.
In the Edinburgh. Are you in a hotel right now?
How old's the hotel?
Airbnb, so an apartment.
B&B. Okay.
Well,
and so it's so funny. I mean, and this has obviously triggered it, right?
Pay attention, folks. You may see something in the background.
Intriguing. So you feel it. Like, what are you feeling right now?
I mean, this is the charism, right? I mean, so
it is.
Get the chicken skin.
I don't. Nothing threatening. Just
just a presence. Well, I mean, let's face it.
They're definitely interested in the conversation.
Scotland is like an entirely haunted country. I mean, the whole thing is haunted. That's why the Scotch is so good, by the way.
Yeah.
But I get the kind of I get a sort of tingle.
I get the tingles too.
Yeah.
It's almost like a chill, a whole body chill.
By the way, it's not worrying me or scaring me.
No.
Somebody's just interested in our conversation.
Clarify, but I just feel, and it's interesting because normally when I come, because obviously you're traveling around and you go to loads of places. Normally I just bless the place straight away.
Yeah.
And I actually haven't done that here. And so
I usually hit the four corners with holy water when I go to a hotel or B&B.
It's a good idea to do that. Yeah.
So I feel like I don't think it's threatening. I feel like it's almost reminding me to do it.
It might be. Well, it probably wants the blessing. See, look, to get to Brandon's question, okay, in a different context. In my experience as an exorcist and having worked in this for as long as I have, I would say that more than 80, perhaps even 8, I would even go as far as to say 80 to 90% of the things that we deal with out there in the field are just lost, frightened, well, for lack of a better word, entities that are looking for a blessing, are looking for a way to be released from their situation. And there's something about the charism of the priesthood that they recognize. There's something that they can see in that. It's perhaps sacrament of holy orders that shines brighter, and they're attracted to it. And so, people are like, do you ever take entities home with you when you go on a case? It's like, yeah, I invite them home with me.
That's what I do.
There. There's a chapel there, and then I release them at the Mass, and it works every single time.
Sometimes you can feel it, too.
You can. And sometimes you even hear it on EVP on the recording that we give in the live stream for
some of you have been at Mass when that's happened.
You've heard it, yeah.
Someone heard people singing with us.
And the Our Father.
Yeah.
So people praying the Our Father with us, and there's like nobody else in the room, but it's like when you go back and you hear the recording, you hear many more voices than just us. So,
well, in terms of me today, the other thing I did call in Durham Cathedral on the way up here, and there are the tombs of St Cuthbert and of the Venerable Bede, and I spent some time praying there today. And
yeah.
I don't know. I'll try and make some sense of it.
Yeah.
I'm here for a few days.
You know what to do, Father. You've been a priest for a while now. You know what to do.
I'm not worried at all.
No.
But if there's anything that might be interesting to our viewers that comes from that, I'll report back and
please. Well, now you get two things to report, so make sure you write them down so we don't forget. Right, the Orthodox views on organ donation, and the result of this presence you feel in your Edinburgh B&B.
That's right. It's the most. Let me tell you, there's nothing spooky about this place. It's the most unlikely place that you'd sense that. But we're pretty much next to Holyrood Palace, the King's residence in Edinburgh. So
the land's too old. I mean,
there's
that's the thing.
Here.
People are always like, what creates a haunted house? It's like, it's the land. So, people will say, well, I just built this house last year. How could it be haunted? Because the land has been there for millions of years. It's like they don't understand that.
Every piece of land's haunted somehow.
Everything is haunted. The only time we call it haunted as a culture is when the paranormal activity grows to such a degree that you can't ignore it anymore, where even the average person would notice it. But everywhere is haunted. I guarantee you. Try this. Prove me wrong. I can tell you, you're going to prove yourself wrong if you disagree with me. But get yourself a handheld digital recorder and do EVP right now.
And I
guarantee you, and if you go back and you record for at least 4 hours, if you go through it, you will get voices talking to you. I guarantee you. I've never had a hard time doing that.
And again, to clarify, this is not an unusual experience for me.
No. Well, it kind of comes with the charisma of, I think, being an exorcist too.
So I was going to ask Brandon, the investigator that was doing the Estes method and had the entity come through several different locations, was it the same investigator that it was speaking to, or was multiple investigators doing Estes and had the same entity?
It was just.
So it sounds.
It was just the one that when I was asking the questions, basically provoking, it was just the one investigator that was doing it.
I just wonder if he may have an attachment that needs to be dealt with.
It could be.
Yeah.
I mean, so back to your question though, how do you get the name? So outside of a demonic entity and a priest using the solemn rite of exorcism, which is almost never, or an occult ritual, or a Jewish exorcism ritual for a Dybbuk, which I don't recommend unless you know what you're doing, as I said. There isn't a way without asking. So what you try to do is kind of the Jewish method a little bit, and that is to become friendly where whatever the entity is trusts you. And obviously with a demonic entity, this is not going to be successful. So this would only work with something that's not on that demonic plane of existence.
So would this idea work with a primordial?
Potentially, but then again, primordials don't necessarily have names. That's kind of a thing that's characteristic of divine creatures. So naming an entity is something that is unique to the path of creation. It's part of the connection to the Word of God. Okay, so a name is a sacred thing because it's an expression of God creating you. As He creates the universe through a word, He creates you through a word. Your name becomes an expression of who you are, which is why names mean something. Only today do we choose names, haphazardly. But in the ancient world, names, you were given a name based upon a characteristic. Certainly, shamanistic cultures continue to do this, and we should be doing this today, because names are important things. They become an aspect of who you are, esoterically speaking. And to just trivialize it down, like Elon Musk with that crazy mathematical formula that he called his kid, or something like X squared or something. I don't remember what it was. It was something stupid thing. It trivializes the importance of this.
I suspect he's got a real name, but
I'm not sure he does.
Well, I don't know. I think he did that for attention.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think it is his legal name, but I think he changed it to a normal one after the fact. So maybe it was, again, like you said, a little bit of both. I'm
afraid I was a terrible fascist. When I was baptizing babies on a regular basis, and they'd come up with these ridiculous names that
So you would not have. Would you not have baptized an X square? I mean,
no. Well, I would have said very gently under my breath, if it was a female, Mary in the middle, and I would have said
there you go,
and have said very gently under my
middle
breath,
name's Marie,
like James or Benedict, or under my.
But to get all seriousness, all joking aside, in seriousness, that's why chrismation is so important. It's the naming. When you become a cleric in the church, you take on a name. It's a part of a divine ritual. It's an expression of a union with the divine. Yeah. So elementals, which are fundamental characteristics of energy within creation itself, don't necessarily have that. So, like, you might not get a name from something of that kind of nature, because it's not an expression of God directly in the same sense that a human being is, an angel or a demon, or some high level aspect of creation in that way. Like birds. I mean, you couldn't go up to a bluebird and say, "Hey, give me your name." It doesn't have one. Now, if you take the bluebird on as a pet, you would give it a name. So you're imparting something, which is why domestication is a kind of spiritual thing, and why you notice that if you have an animal, they kind of start to look like you. And they start to behave like you. I mean, most people will say Heathcliff is like the spitting image of it.
They literally become your familiar.
They become your familiar because you give them a name, you give them life, you give them a part of yourself. But in the wild, they're just natural energy forces. They don't have any of these kinds of characteristics. They don't interact in that way. But when you domesticate an animal into a pet, they become actually more sophisticated spiritually, and they become an aspect of you. You animate them in a way. So elementals are a lot like that in that same sense. So they don't necessarily have a name. So you're not going to necessarily get a name from a mid to low level elemental. Does that answer?
Would you be okay with coming down here soon and getting rid of it?
Did you lose your thing? Oh, Jamie will have lost her headphones again.
Your toe hit the cord and it popped out.
Was it me?
I don't know. It just popped out. Anyway.
But I mean, you'd have to, we'd have to look to see what our schedule is for investigations. I don't want to jump the line to anybody that we've got on the books now, but I mean, I think we've got
one May 17th. Is the only one.
May 17th.
Is the only one nailed down.
I might come over in about July. So
to July. Well, maybe you can come
out. Let us know.
Yeah, maybe we can go up to Tennessee and help Brandon out.
Now, you said the location was in North Georgia, right?
Oh, did you say North Georgia? I thought you said Tennessee.
That was the original case we did last year.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we're in Middle Tennessee, and everywhere we go, it's not, all it's doing is threatening. Mm-hmm. So it's not high on my list of concerns, but the fact that it's always there, no matter where we've been.
Someone has an attachment.
Yeah, it's the...
Someone in your group has an attachment. Yeah. That's the only way that would happen.
Sounds familiar. I think I just said that.
Yeah, that's the only way that would happen.
That can be dealt with.
Yeah. But I mean, it's not uncommon for investigators to get attachments on a regular basis, because most of them are not skilled.
They don't know what to do afterwards.
They don't.
Right.
I mean, but then you got the church, and the church typically doesn't want to get involved in anything paranormal. So you
Never.
can't. The people that are most prepared to deal with this are the ones that don't do it, and the ones that are most eager to do it are ill prepared to deal with it after the fact. So it's kind of a paradoxical relationship, and it's an unfortunate part of our reality. You know, it's kind of the way things are today. But I'm not opposed to it as long as we can fit it in. But yeah, Father Chris is, I think, planning a trip in July, so maybe we can try to work something out where we can all get together. You'd like Tennessee. I think you'd enjoy Tennessee. If you like Georgia, you like Tennessee. Tennessee's more beautiful than Georgia. Tennessee is actually a more beautiful state than Georgia, I think.
I'd love to
Well,
go
we
there.
also have Gatlinburg.
Gatlinburg is one of my favorite places. It has a wonderful Scotch bar,
I've got
and
some stories about Gatlinburg.
I'm going to tell
I
you,
can't
Father
discuss.
Chris, the Scotch. It has the largest Scotch collection in the world. It's actually in Gatlinburg. It's not in Scotland. They have more of every different kind of Scotch than any other place in one place that you can try.
The Jig and Reel in Knoxville.
It's called the Jig and Reel. Yeah. They've got something like close to 1,000 different bottles that you could try.
Yeah, I've been there twice and tried my darndest to get through the list.
It's where I was able to
stagger back to the hotel.
It was where I had we walk. You get a hotel nearby and you walk back. It's the only way to do it. But
I've enjoyed being back here because it meant not only am I in Scotland at the moment, so I'll be able to have some nice whiskey. But I was I was in Hastings, in fact, the old town of Hastings, which is the total other end of the country, and they had a brilliant tobacconist, and all the cigars were in there, all in their own labels, not in plain packaging as they insist on in Australia. You know, the woke police after us. So I have enjoyed the sort of. I said on the way out, I said, thank you for being free. And that's how I went out.
I love that.
So I have brought 3 up to share with friends up here in Scotland as well. So,
we'll have to take you to the Jig and Reel. We'll have to take you to the Jig and Reel. They have a bottle, at least they did when I was there, of Lagavulin 37-year-old.
It's still up on the,
It's $250 a dram. So it's not cheap, but I'll tell you, it is truly the most exceptional Scotch I've ever tasted. It's wonderful. And I'm so glad to be able to try it.
I don't doubt it is.
Yeah, it's really good. Okay, so I think we are currently at the top of...
I'm going to sign off after this hour just because I've really got to get some sleep. I drove up here from Manchester today and did 2 stops, so I'm kind of exhausted, and which is why I've over-talked in the first hour, because I was getting in there.
Trying to get it in. Because we haven't seen you much this season. You've been traveling too much.
I know. It's been difficult, but I'll certainly be back next week, and I'll be having to bless this place before I go to sleep.
Not a bad idea, Father. Not a bad idea. Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you, Brandon. Brandon, you are welcome.
David, I'm definitely going to listen to what you've had to say, because I'm really interested in your topic. So I'll watch it again.
Be sure to. Be sure to.
Safe travels, Father.
So, Brandon, you feel free to stay on and come back in the 3rd hour. You can just sit right there and come back for the question and answer period. But right now, we're going to go to break. And when we come back here, we will have our guest, brand new guest, David Gerrelli, to talk about the negative near-death experience. You don't want to miss this one. It's going to be very interesting, a whole new take on the subject. Don't go away.
Tracking you down. Tracking you down.
Welcome back, everybody, to Vestiges After Dark. Tonight, we're getting into the meat of it now with our brand new guest, David Gerrelli. Going to be talking about negative near-death experiences and all of the research he has done in this arena. I think it's going to be interesting for you paranormal types out there, which is a large part of our audience. I wonder why. But it's going to be an interesting time for the next 2 hours. Don't go away. All right, let's get started here with this incredible show. I think you're going to really enjoy this. Our guest tonight is David Gerrelli. He is a global director of technology with practical experience in the field of technological innovation, data science, and emerging technologies. David would apply his 25 plus years of experience working in a field steeped in logic and science and apply these skills to years of research in the field of near-death experiences. Originally from the rolling hills of the United Kingdom, but having lived all around the world, David now resides in Dallas, Texas. His research would take on a life of its own, revealing a dark and sinister aspect of this surprisingly common phenomenon. What started as a journey of light would lead David down a path to the very depths of hell. The author's roller coaster of fear and horror would find grounding in the universal concepts of reason, science, and logic. David would apply his decades of experience within data science and analytics to cross-reference thousands of witness accounts into cohesive observations and logical conclusions without the bias of religion or personal belief. David studied this religion and wrote this book with an open mind, and he hopes you will join him on this journey with the same open mind and childlike curiosity. Again, David's book is How to Escape from Hell, Studies and Interpretations of the Afterlife, which I believe is available on Amazon and everywhere books are sold, I would imagine. But let's welcome our guest, David Gerrelli, to the show. How you doing tonight, David?
Hello, David.
I'm good, Ron. I'm good. It's good to see you guys. I love your studio, by the way. It's
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a little bit of everything back
behind
here.
us, yeah.
Thank you.
We cover it all.
You got it.
We do. We cover it all. And what really fascinated me about your work, David, is that you bring a scientific approach to this. You know, a lot of our guests tend to be on more of the metaphysical side of things, the new age side of things, which is fine. But, you know, I think it definitely elicits a skeptical response in a lot of members of the audience. So it would be more interesting, I think, to hear from a scientific vantage point some of the things you're talking about. And it's a really fascinating subject and a personal one for us over here because Jamie Wolf, my co-host, died 3 times and was hit head on.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she was hit head on in a D&D. It was a drunken driving incident. The guy hit her while she was riding her motorcycle. She went flying.
That's one way to put it. Wasn't very graceful.
Yeah, it wasn't very graceful. She was severed in 2 practically and died 3 times and had very negative near-death experiences.
Very much so, yeah.
So I'm sure she's going to find and be able to relate to a lot of what you're talking
Taking
about.
notes.
So I guess let's start off by talking about how did you know, what's the origin of your work in researching this?
So I mean, to be honest, from a scientific point of view, just the sheer number of NDEs was quite compelling, right? So personally, I have a chronic condition, so I haven't had a near-death experience myself.
Okay.
But I've had multiple surgeries. I have Crohn's disease. It's quite a severe version.
Yeah.
So I've been in and out of hospital my entire life. I did have a few very close calls, but I never had a near-death experience.
Okay.
And obviously, any time you go through one of these life-threatening situations, I'm sure Jamie can testify to, you start to question, well, what happens after that, right?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Have I lived the most kind of divine life, or have I slipped? And I can pretty confidently say that I've slipped on more than one occasion. And coming from my background, I wanted to know for sure, if I could. Obviously, you're never going to know for sure, right? We're talking about the afterlife.
Sure.
But there's a wealth of data out there that we can refer to. To put it into context, if you take the US population in 2021, there was 331 million people. Of that, around 5% of the population are estimated to have a near-death experience, which is about 16.5 million people of that 331 people would have had a near-death experience. That's a lot of people.
That's
right?
a lot of people.
Ignore
That's a lot of people.
that kind of information, right?
Yeah.
You compare that because a lot of people draw comparisons of near-death experience research to UFOs. In a year in the United States, there's around 4,000 to 8,000 reports of UFO sightings against 16.5 million estimated near-death experiences. And of that number, around 4 to 12% are reported to be distressing or hellish experiences.
Yeah.
It's about 1 million people of 331 million people that potentially have gone to hell, met demons, had some kind of very traumatic experience. These experiences stay with these people for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And, some people have a negative experience followed by a positive experience. And actually, I do focus on that quite a bit in the book. But there are a number of people that have negative experiences, and they find it hard to talk about. They have physical reactions to have to talk about the experience they went through. So that was kind of the background that got me into it. I was thinking, well, there's these millions of people having these experiences. The number of reports that are made are in the thousands. I had to go through thousands upon thousands upon thousands of reports. I call them witness reports to dig out specifically using data science any references to hellish or negative or any experiences like that, and then kind of aggregate that data and see if I can find some common themes. And that's what the book's about. The book's about those common themes, the things that are most common in hellish or distressing experiences. And unfortunately, even though we're looking at 1 million Americans in each generation having a hellish experience, not many of them report it because there's a sense of shame. Like,
Yes.
I went to hell because I deserved it. And that's very important to the answer as to why we would even be there in the first place.
Right.
A lot of people have this shame and they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to relive it. They don't have to go through it again. They think they're damned. And there's an irony in that, which I'll come to. So the data was sparse from a hellish experience, but what data I did have, there were common themes threaded throughout. There were a few outliers, some fringe situations. I'm actually talking to a guy right now that had a distressing experience. He was clinically dead from malaria, died several times during his experience. And it's been a really fascinating discussion because it's not the traditional negative hellish experience that I came across when studying for the book. And I spent 3 years with my head inside this data.
Yeah.
And, I wanted to come at it from a completely non-theological, non-religious point of view.
Sure.
I'm born Church of England, so that's my background, 16th century Pope. So that's my background, but I didn't come from a particularly religious family, so I didn't have any bias necessarily impressed on me.
Right.
But I tried to step away from that. And let's just look at the data, right? If this is true, we're talking about 16.5 million people that have potentially spoken to God, recently. And so, or have seen demons or whatever the context of their experience, this is what the data. So to me, that was just too hard to resist from a data science point of view. And so I got into it, and it's you mentioned egregore earlier in your show, which is in the book. It's a very fundamental aspect of the conclusions that I came to.
Really?
Which was fascinating.
Yeah. I want to get into that tonight for sure.
Yeah. So that was a big, that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
But just generally speaking, from my experience, who doesn't want to know if they're going to go to hell, right? Who doesn't want to know that?
Sure. That's a common, I think, thing that we see with our clients. As you know, or probably know, I am an exorcist. This is my exorcist assistant with the Order of Exorcists in the Old Catholic Church, which is a kind of a derivative of Roman Catholicism. We're not under the Vatican, which frees us up a bit to be able to cut through some of that red tape, to be able to help more people. And we can help people from different backgrounds, different religions, or even people that don't belong to a religion, because we're not bound to some of the rules that we would have to follow if we were under Roman Catholic authority. So it's got its benefits. Deficits are we're not as funded. So it's harder to do more when you don't have the resources that the larger establishment has. But one of the things I would say that I notice a lot with our clients is that there is this fear response. That they're clearly, even if you're coming at it, and I try to, I even though I am a bishop and people might interpret that to be that I have a certain bias towards, Christianity or something, I really work very hard in my actual field activity to not have that bias, because I never know who I'm going to be dealing with. We help Muslims, we help people from other faiths. I've even worked with atheists. So it's religion's only secondary to what I do. The primary thing is they're having an experience. They're encountering something. It's cohesive. It's familiar. It's prolific across cultures. It's across jurisdictions, locations, you name it. And it's the same kind of experience that we would relate, at least in the verbiage of the Catholic faith, to be demonic. So that in itself, even if I weren't a bishop, would fascinate me, because why would all these people from different walks of life be having this experience? If it's really just a fabric of their mind, then why would an atheist who doesn't believe in these things experience something like this? That's what really hooked me into trying to say, we need to look further into what's going on here. So it's kind of how I found you, actually, David, because you're doing this very thing. So I'm curious, what are some of the conclusions that you've come to so far? Like in the terms of the research, what have you noticed as these pervading themes across different demographics, age groups, and religions?
That's the thing. I think to your point, it doesn't really matter what your demographic it is, what your religion is, what your age group is. The experiences are consistent. I think there are concepts that are brought into that experience that are familiar to the experiencer, because the what's happening to them is supposed to be a good experience in most cases, apart from obviously hellish experiences. With hellish experiences, it's very, everything is very common. Like there's a lot of repeating themes, in terms of the hellish experiences. But you mentioned atheists. So if you look statistically at people that have near-death experiences, it doesn't really discriminate against atheists and Christian and Catholic or Muslim, or it's pretty much everybody has these experiences, right? Regardless of what they do or do not believe. And a lot of people, even after a hellish experience, will go on to Buddhism or Christianity or Catholicism. They'll choose a faith that works for them. But the presiding kind of wisdom that most comes from near-death experiences is that complete absence of the fear of death, which they started with in life, right? It's just like, I know that my consciousness will continue. And not only that, when we talk about near-death experiences, I think a lot of people aren't aware that there are a large number of scientific studies by scientists that have been conducted to determine if near-death experiences are hallucinogenic, if they're intensive care unit hallucinations, which are very common, and that's normally what someone who's had an NDE would be told by a doctor. You had a hallucination based on your
the ICU psychosis.
Psychosis, right?
Is that what they call it?
Yeah, I had it.
They refer to it as ICU psychosis.
That's what they told me it was.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Or ICU hallucination, but they'll tell you that it's not something that actually happened. Either way.
Right.
But again, that's misleading, right? So, for example, there was a study that was done in Europe where a scientist, and I had this in a book, he measured 3 various different types of consciousness. So one type of consciousness was just everyday awake, moving around, having breakfast with your family, that kind of thing. The other type of consciousness was when you're asleep, so measured the brain waves of somebody when they were asleep. And so he compared these types of consciousness, and the third was obviously NDE. So he measured what were the brain waves, what was the brain activity during an NDE. So this was an important research program. And so you've got these 3 very distinct forms of consciousness, right? Which is the having an NDE, being asleep, and being awake. It's very simple. So what he expected was that the most brain activity, which indicates reality, would be found in being awake. then sleep, and then NDE, right? That's what you would think. If it was hallucination, it would be lower down than sleep. Actually, what he found is that people that have NDEs, their brainwaves and their brain patterns are above and more active than being awake. So you could argue that a near-death experience is more real than real life. And that's what this study demonstrated.
Wow.
And the thing is, if you correlate that to people that have had near-death experiences, they say Earth is like the illusion, like life is an illusion. And it's hard I never figured out what they meant, but the study helped a little bit. Life is not real. This is real. Heaven is real. Hell is real. Like, where mainly positive NDEs are the ones where they say it's real. Hellish NDEs, as you can imagine, are just chaos and pain and fear and so on and so forth. But for the positive ones, this is, and the other overwhelming thing that comes out of this, and this is a whole nother can of worms that probably can't get into right now, is home. And I read a couple of articles today, some new reports. As I said, I don't know if I mentioned, just in the last 2 weeks, it's been 7 new reports of near-death experiences, just in the last 2 weeks.
Wow.
That's how frequent these reports come in. And there was one earlier in the month of April this month where a Korean guy who wasn't religious whatsoever had a near-death experience. And again, described all of the characteristics that you would expect to see in a near-death experience. And so coming back to the science part, there is actually a mechanism for measuring the validity of a near-death experience, i.e., is it real or is it hallucination or is it religious bias or any kind of bias, not necessarily religious, any kind of bias. It's called the Grayson scale. And the Grayson scale asks 16 specific questions. And some of those you'd be familiar with, like, did you leave your body?
Yes.
Did you have an out-of-body experience?
Yes.
But there are questions that, and it's measured from 0 to 2. So you answer 0 to 2. But there are ones you wouldn't expect. So for example, did you come to a border of no return? So this is way more common in NDEs than you might expect, where people have a near-death experience and they get to a point where, like, if I keep walking, I'm not going back. Like, this is it for me. But they want to keep going forward, right? Because who wouldn't if you're in heaven? So,
Sure.
They're surrounded by this incredible, indescribable feeling of love. And in the book, I call it agape, which you may be familiar with, which is
Agape,
the love that God has for man and man has for God. Because love is not a sufficient word to describe the sense of love you feel when you're, and that, again, that's another statistical data point that just flies out the screen, Well,
that's why the Greeks had different words for it. In English, we kind of, use it generically. I mean, I've said this before. It's like we say we love God, we love our wife, we love pizza. You would never do that in Greek. There's a lot of languages that have specific words that mean the different types of love, and agape is a whole different animal when it comes to that. And as you said, to your point, when people describe heaven or an experience with God, it is love that they're feeling, but it's nothing like any of these physical forms that we're familiar with.
Correct. And most people that have this agape, this feeling, and I just don't feel that love is a big enough word to describe it based on what's been communicated to me through the people that I've spoken to that have had NDEs. But there's no words. This is very common with NDEs. And I saw Jamie had a similar situation where, for example, the colors that you see in heaven or in the afterlife, I try not to use too many common words, but in the afterlife, there's colors that people can't describe. They'll say, I can't describe the color to you because it does not exist on Earth. There are colors and things that exist in this space and sounds as well, music that's indescribable to the human mind. And also I cover that in the book as well, the power of the soul and this kind of thing, right? Which is important to explaining, at least from the research that I did, the existence of hell in the first place. So there's a lot of things that happen when people get to the other side. From a scientific point of view, I mentioned the study. In addition, and I'm trying to, kind of one of the things that I want to do with near-death experiences is try and step away from this whole conspiracy association, because this is real. Tens of millions of Americans, and 200, 300 million people every year all around the world having these experiences. And if it affects that many people, surely we should be taking it a bit more seriously than perhaps we would with some other situations that occur.
Sure.
And so another thing that is hard for science, and again, you can relate an NDE to an ICU experience, right? Sure, you can do that. And it's hard to argue with that. And it's because you can't prove it physically. You don't have any ECGs or anything, measurements that you can use, because no one's doing those studies, which is part of the problem. But one thing science have not been able to explain, and this is more common than you might think, is when somebody is in an intensive care situation or they're coding, their heart rate stopping, they're flatlining, very common. I mean, it's not very common, but it's common where, and particularly in children, which is the surprising part, that somebody. So there was a report of a young girl that had respiratory failure in the emergency room, in the recovery room, and the doctors were struggling to bring her back. And this is very common in these kind of clinical death situations, right? It doesn't happen like this. It goes on for a while while the doctors try and treat you.
Sure.
And during this period of time, this little girl, when she was woken up by the doctor started to talk to her and kind of give her reassurance information. And during the period where she was being respirated and they were trying to bring her back, the doctor went to speak to her parents and another room in the hospital, like a few rooms down, right? So he goes out of the emergency room, the crash room, goes down a few rooms, and he goes into this room to speak to the parents and he talks to them, this is what's happening, we're doing our best to bring her back, blah, 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 blah. So when the girl was restored, when she's brought back, she describes exactly what all the doctors and nurses were wearing inside that room from above. She saw things in the room that she could not have seen, apart from the very fact she was dead. She saw things that she could not have seen. But more astonishing than that, she was able to recite the conversation 3 doors down while she was clinically dead. Wow. And this happens more often than people would think. How do you explain that with science? How do you explain that hallucination? This girl possessed knowledge of a conversation that occurred 4 or 5 minutes earlier before she was resuscitated. Yeah. And these kind of things happen more commonly than people think. So, and obviously if you believe in NDEs, then it's only fair and it's implied that you would believe that everybody who speaks up to a degree, I mean, you still need to run it past the Grayson scale. That will give you, because, you want to be fairly certain that what you're being told happened. A lot of the reports are validated for clinical accuracy to make sure that they were clinically dead. Yeah. But equally, if you accept positive experiences, which make up the vast majority, as I mentioned, like 96% of all experiences are positive, then you need to consider the fact that there are negative and hellish experiences, and they do have commonalities. And so let's talk about that, right? So you asked me the question, kind of what happens and what conclusions did I come to? Yes. So there were many things that you would entirely, and this has kind of led me down an interesting path. There are many things of a negative and hellish experience that you would expect to see, right? Like demons. And with the demons, it was similar to the situation when people couldn't describe colors that they saw because they didn't exist on Earth. But the demons, they struggled to describe as well because they were just so horrifying. Mm-hmm. There were no words to describe how horrifying these creatures were, these demons. And typically what happens in a positive or a negative NDE, it's the most common initial phase of any death experience, is they find him in a place which many refer to as the void. And this void is completely black, very pitch black. Sure was. And it is, right. And it goes on forever. And you're not scared. There's no fear that exists in this void. You don't, I mean, even for negative experiences, initially there's no fear. They find confusion in this place. Same for positive experiences. They find confusion as well many times, but it's not terrifying. They feel relaxed and at peace in this space. It sounds like the Jewish Sheol. Would you say that would be a fair assessment? I think so. The Greek Hades, the Jewish Sheol, Japanese.
It was like being awake in nothing.
Yeah. It's not scary though, right?
It wasn't scary until the bad stuff started happening.
Until the stuff,
there was nothing, and then when my consciousness came awake.
Why don't you describe for him what you experienced, and then we can use that as a reference point. Give a brief description of the entire experience.
So, hit head on, motorcycle accident. Lost consciousness while they were putting me on the chopper to life flight me. And I was out for about 6.5, 7 days.
Completely in a coma when they during this time.
Yeah, they put me out to put me on the chopper because I was almost cut in half. And they were trying to, get my leathers off of me. And so there was basically, when they put me out, it was nothing. There was nothing. And then I felt my consciousness wake up, and I was in a dark space. But it was like a void. It was just like waking up into nothing. And then that's when I could hear my parents talking in a waiting room. I don't know what they were saying. I've lost that since then. But then I could see this figure in the corner that I could only akin to a devilish type, Dante's Inferno type devil. And he basically told his little minions to punish me. And so then I felt what I could only feel like little piranha teeth pulling at my skin and trying to pull me apart.
And was this inside the void, or had you left the void at this point?
This was in the void. It was still very dark and very almost like being in a blacker than black cave. But I could see what I would only consider Lucifer or Satan in the corner.
Were you weightless in this environment?
I was weightless. I was outside of my body.
So like in
but
space,
I could feel,
like almost like
it was
you're
almost like
floating
I was
through
in space.
Okay.
But
when these creatures were tearing away your skin, did you ever feel? So I'm assuming there was some physical.
I could feel it. It
yourself.
felt like if someone comes up and pinches you in the underarm really hard, that hurts. Well, I felt that all over my body, but yet I wasn't in my body.
But was it incredibly painful, like excruciating,
Yes,
or more of a pinch?
it was an excruciating painful where I knew I was in trouble, and that's
kind of
when
eaten alive, painful, right?
That's exactly what it felt like they were going to devour me and eat me alive, and that's when I wasn't religious at the time. I was a Christian, but I wasn't practicing. But I only thought to call out to Christ. I said, I'm a child of Jesus. You cannot take me. And it continued for a few minutes, and then I remembered, because I was Protestant, but I was also a police officer, and the patron saint of law enforcement is St. Michael. And so I called upon St. Michael, and I said, I'm a soldier of St. Michael. You cannot have me. And then all of a sudden, the pain stopped, and I literally felt this light above me, and it felt like someone grabbed me by the shoulder with their hands and pulled me straight up. And then
Very common, by the way.
I opened up my eyes and I was awake.
Yeah,
so,
and that's, all of that, I came across exactly what you described. It's interesting that it's occurred to you.
I'm glad to hear that, because I haven't talked to anybody else who's had a negative death experience that was even remotely close to that.
Well, you've answered many of the questions. I talk about all of the things you just spoke about in the book.
Okay.
But I try to explain.
Don't worry, I'm getting your book.
That's all right. I'm not trying to upsell you. I'm just, for me, I'm honored to meet people like you, people that I can speak to have had this experience.
Well, I'm honored to meet people like you who are actually looking into it from a scientific perspective, because when I did wake up, even with all the chaplains and religious leaders I spoke to during the time, and the doctors, they all, you were on a lot of pain medication, and this, I'm like, no, this
justify it. Yeah.
This wasn't pain medication, y'all.
Yeah.
So
tell them about the sigils, though.
So when I was awake, I was lucid. I was in. I had been removed from ICU to a regular room. And I was still feeling kind of weird and felt like something was after me. And I remember waking up one day. I was speaking with my parents. They were in the room with me. But around the border of the hospital room, usually they have like a little decorative border around the room, some gaudy fruit or something. And that changed. It started to turn into what I could only describe as sigils. And they blazed forward, and then the room got almost like cobwebs in it. I even asked my mother, God bless her, to wipe the cobwebs off of the doorway. Wow. And she actually went over there and looked for them, couldn't find them.
She couldn't find them.
And so
it was
your
medical condition at the time that you were experiencing this? Were you still in and out consciousness?
I was conscious, but I was on Dilaudid and several other medications because I had so many broken bones and so many surgeries. But what I find interesting is that months later, after I was home convalescing, I started watching a show that someone had suggested I watch just on a whim called Supernatural, the Winchester Boys. And there was an episode on there where they were stuck in a space and they started covering the space in these sigils to protect from the demons coming after them, and I recognized it.
Well, let's parenthetically, I should mention that the Supernatural series used actual
right.
It used the angelic.
It was Enochian. Enochian was what I was seeing.
Yeah.
I recognized it right away.
Yeah.
It actually scared me, and I sat straight up as much as I could at the time, and got like a cold sweat. Because I'm watching this on TV, I'm like, that's what was in my damn room.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about that prior to then. So that was kind of another little weird experience.
So I asked that, David, to see, because I'm curious. This was the part of her story that fascinated me. I've been listening to the story for 3, 4, or 5 years now. And I'm always, every time I hear it, it just fascinates me. Have you encountered people in your research that have seen those kinds of Enochian sigils on the walls.
It was like a protection was put around me. That's what it felt like to me, but I didn't know what it was at the time.
I think it's very specific to your experience, I would say, Jamie.
Yeah.
And so let me roll back a little bit and kind of start from the beginning, right? And then we'll get to the point, because I've got some questions to you as well, Jamie, to see if I can, like, why, because I imagine the question you're asking yourself is, why did this happen to me?
Yeah.
Because you're in that 2 to 6% or 12%, whatever it is, right? 4 to 12%, sorry. Mm-hmm. You're in that very small minority of people that have these distressing experiences. And that's where my research focused. Why do certain people have hellish experiences?
Right.
So starting from the top, you would assume that everybody that committed, because we were taught this, everybody that committed suicide would definitely have a negative experience, right?
You would think.
It's fair to say most of us would assume that. The reality is, statistically, about 50% of people who attempt or commit suicide have a distressing near-death experience. It's not 100% of people at all. Mm-hmm. And again, removing bias, really important to just focus on the data that we have and just put up, and when I say bias, preconceptions, you have to think out of the box a little bit. Mm-hmm. And in the introduction, you mentioned like that childlike curiosity, right? It's just like starting from the beginning again. So then also, so surely Muslims have a different experience to Christians, right? And people in China who have a completely different faith system. A lot of these countries are secular.
Sure.
So, and the reality is that there are certain things. I mentioned the Korean near-death experience I read about today, which is brand new. There was a Chinese theme around the experience he had. So he went to a place like a Chinese palace. But this is a very common theme in near-death experiences where you go to have this thing called a life review. And I've only ever came across a life review in a hellish experience twice. And in one of those scenarios, it was the life review that led them to hell because they couldn't complete it, which I'll come to. It's important to get through that process. And for those that don't know, a life review, I'm sure everybody's heard of my life flashed before my eyes, right?
Yeah.
We've all heard that.
Yeah, it's common.
So it's very common, right? Yeah. I mean, it's been said for hundreds or thousands of years.
Yeah.
So there's a thing that happens when people die shortly after the void. So let me talk about positive experience. What would have happened if you didn't have a negative, or typically happens when you have a positive experience. In the same place, in that void, people float there for a while. There's no time and space in the afterlife. There's no concept of time.
No, there was no concept of.
There was nothing, right?
It just goes on. You were just there. Yeah, you were just there.
Correct.
Right.
Time and space is very exclusive to our universe. It doesn't exist in the afterlife based on the research.
Right.
So for positive experiences, there's a prick of light that typically appears at some point in that experience. And I can't say how many minutes because, again, there's no time and space. You can't put a time on it. And then that light would come towards them, and then they would start to telepathically communicate with that light. Although telepathy is too basic to describe it. It's more like an impression. Imagine when someone communicates with you, you hear their words and you process it. But in the ears, their senses are heightened. They don't just hear it, they experience it. So I can tell you about my entire life and communicate all my experiences, emotions, and everything that happens to me instantaneously, and you would understand all of it immediately. There's no need for words. And it's not even telepathy, because telepathy is just the wireless transmission of words into your brain. So I call it impression. And it was actually an India that died in Africa that I heard this from. She's very popular. And she called it impressions. I think that's the best way to describe that form of communication in the afterlife, which, by the way, doesn't happen to negative people. There's an element of telepathy, but it's not as it's a very beautiful experience for people that have a positive experience when it comes to communication. So this light comes towards them, and as it grows, it could be any number. It's an angel. It's a family member. It could be God, for example, although God would never assume a presence in his experiences. It's always, you can just feel God. I've not once come across a description of God, which I was looking for.
Yeah, I'm sure you were.
I never came across that. Jesus was there several times.
Really?
Yeah, Jesus was there quite a few times. And so a being of some variety, and it does depend. And some people say, well, why is it people see what they want to see when they die? Well, surely that's a hallucination. Well, if you think of an infinite intelligence that loves you more than is describable, agape, right? They want to make you feel as comfortable as possible, right?
Sure.
When you die.
Yeah.
So they have the power, and you have we all have the power. And it's again, I'll go off the track a little bit because it's a big subject. I mean, if I could talk about it in 2 hours, I wouldn't have written a book.
It's okay. We go all over the track on this
It's
show.
fine.
I'm going to divert time to time.
Please
so
do.
I've got this chapter effective about the power of your soul, like how powerful you are. You just don't realize it. So on Earth, we're shackled to these kind of lumps of flesh,
Meat sacks.
these vessels that carry us for our lives, these weak, vulnerable, diseased vessels.
Yeah.
But as a soul, we have this incredible power. And the reason I came to that conclusion is not an assumption, again, coming back to the data, but there's some characteristics of what happens to people once they've left their body, which is very important. So one of them is 360 vision. They can see everywhere all at once. I don't know if you had that, Jamie, but typically it happens more at the positive level. And
it was like I was seeing, but yeah, I was seeing everything. It was more like I was feeling my sight. You know what I mean? It's
exactly
it's hard to
which
describe.
Is an elevated. It is hard to describe.
You were experiencing your sight, but you weren't really seeing like we do on this plane.
Correct.
Yeah.
But the best way to describe it to us mere mortals is it's 360 vision. You can see everywhere all at once. That's probably a lot. It's hard to describe a lot of these things that happen on the other side, but that's one of the things is full vision. And then you take it a step further, many reports of people, once they leave their body, out of body experiences, they will fly through the ceiling of their hospital or wherever it is they passed away into the heavens, right? They'll go and they'll describe Earth very clearly and detailed. It's not vague, it's not abstract. It's a very detailed description. I saw hospital roof, I saw the street that I was in, I saw the car I pulled up in, so it's a very accurate description of that point in time. And then they come to and this happens quite a lot, they end up kind of outside of Earth looking down through the atmosphere. But when they think of something and they think, oh, I wonder how my sister's doing, for example, immediately their vision will focus on that point and they will see exactly what their sister is doing back on Earth. Their vision will just zoom straight to whatever they're thinking about that particular time. And the same about where they want to be. And any question they think of is answered immediately through this mechanism of impressions, right? So the reason I'm saying all of this is if you think about what would it take to be, number one, you're no longer restricted by gravity. Again, people talk a lot about and you probably would have felt this as well, Jamie, is that you're not cold, you're not hot.
No,
you don't.
I just was.
No pain.
Just
was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can move around freely. Unfortunately for you went down the negative path. So you were one of the things, like a huge difference between positive and negative at that point in the void, which is really important to why it even happened to you in the first place, is that you still had a physical body that could be torn apart by a demon.
Right. I was above it, but I could still feel what they were doing to me. Yes.
99% of positive experiences have no physical body. All they see is a light, and typically a light blue light. And I read about this again today in one of the more recent reports. So people that have positive experiences, they very rarely report having a physical being. And that, again, was part of the analysis that I did, and it kind of helped me to that conclusion where I eventually got to, which I'll come to. So anyway, kind of I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but kind of rolling back. So then obviously I looked at these different scenarios and I was like, well, okay, so why would I still don't understand why someone would have a hellish experience. Like, what is it specifically about their scenario that caused them to have this? In order to figure that out, I had to look at the positive experiences. I had to learn more about the light before I could figure out the dark. Like, what is it that's different about a positive experience to a negative one? And typically what I found in like I mentioned, only 2 hellish experiences came after a life review, where you review life, and that's a whole different subject. But typically when people went into, just like Jamie, when people went into the void, if they were going to have a negative experience, it occurred without any life review whatsoever. The negative experiences never made it past, or never to the life review, which is the first step on most positive journeys into heaven or the afterlife or nirvana, whatever you want to call it. And so Jamie, that's not surprised that Jamie, not surprised, but I mean, it's different every time, but Jamie didn't have the experience, which is very common with negative experiences, where they start to fall. They at one moment they're suspended in this darkness. They feel they're not afraid. They're not ecstatically happy either, but they're just comfortable. They're at peace. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't feel weird. It's where I should be. For negative experiences, they just boom, and they start to fall. Extraordinary speed. They start to fall. And then as they start to approach light, and I mean like an orange light from flames, which is where it gets into that more traditional hellish experience. Yeah. They start, more than they can see, they start to feel more than they can see. And that's the first thing that becomes most apparent. And also, surprisingly, the smell of burning flesh and sulfur came up surprisingly commonly in these hellish experiences. And again, it's connected to that physicality, right? People, They have positive experiences. They don't have a body. They don't have a sense of smell. They have no earthly connection to their human body. But in hellish experiences, they're still themselves. They're still physical. They're smelling. They're breathing. They're having all the same experiences that they would as a human, even though they're no longer a human. So they're falling down. And the thing that grabs most people first is the screaming, the shouting, the chaos. But above all of that, what they feel is this overwhelming need by those that exist in this place to have them feel the pain that they're feeling. Like they'll say, I felt that they wanted me to hurt the way they're hurting, to be scared the way they're scared, to be fearful the way they're fearful. So there's this kind of energy that wants to consume you and wants you to be part of their pain, you know. And so and then I cover this extensively in the book. And there's lots of experience. People being torn apart by demons is very common, and it's also, and it's horrifying to read about. To be honest, when you're researching it, to have to read this over and over again could be a little bit traumatizing, but you kind of get used to it. But tearing flesh from the body, you can imagine the pain involved in being. I can't think of a worse way to die or to be tortured is to be.
They were trying. They were trying,
but your flesh was coming back, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I was fighting.
And this is common. People will have a limb torn off or flesh torn off, but then they'll look back and it'll be there again and again and again and again and just over and over and over and over and over again. And that's pretty horrifying, right? From that perspective, demons in that space. And when we say demons, I mentioned demonology. I didn't get into it extensively. I would love to know, if I get time, I'd love to look into the origins of these demons. Just from the data I had, it was impossible to get to that depth of understanding because the data wasn't there. You know, you're talking to everyday people, but there was some structure in this kind of these evil beings. They had some kind of command structure in some cases, not all cases. But anyway, it was a very horrifying experience. And so I started to look into the point and so we had to get further back than when they had the experience and understand more about the person, because the fact they had a near-death experience doesn't tell, or a distressing near-death experience doesn't tell us why they had it. We just know they did. So why did they have it? And so I started to look into this, and a theme that came up quite commonly is, and I'd be interested to hear what you think, Jamie, is, and then my research went back to it, which I'll come to, but ultimately all of the people that had a distressing experience, they felt as though either they deserved it, they felt as though they were unworthy of God's love, of peace, if you like. They carried some kind of guilt. They carried some kind of heavy weighted guilt or something that made them feel unworthy, you know, which is it's sad, you know, it's really sad when you read the stories of these people that felt that way. And I'll come to what happened to those that called out. So you mentioned you called out, right? You prayed.
I did.
And I can't. That's how most people. I'm jumping to the end here. I'm a bit of a spoiler alert. Most people are saved from heaven. From hell. Most people are saved from hell by calling out. And it doesn't have to be a particular saint, a particular religion. It is. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit. But ultimately, if you're in hell, and let's say that, so this negative energy I mentioned. So when you come to this life, when you come to your life, right? So when you were born, we can all agree that you were a positive being, right? You were born, you didn't hate anybody, you didn't feel guilt, you didn't feel anger, you didn't feel contempt, none of these negative feelings, right? And there's this concept called the law of attraction. Positive energy attracts positive energy, and negative energy attracts negative energy. But then when you go through your life, as you get kind of worn down by it, you start to pick up some negativity, right? So it could be contempt, it could be guilt, it could be anger, it could be vengeance, any number of experiences or feelings that are incompatible with love, with agape. But these things are not compatible with positive love. You can't combine contempt or guilt. It's not a concept of love, and certainly not agape, certainly not the kind of love we see on the other side, which is indescribable. So we get to this point where we pass over and we're done with our lives, right? And we've got these two types of energy that exist within our consciousness, within our soul, or within ourselves, which is I've had these positive experiences and I've had these negative experiences. So the life review is designed to help you to learn, to say designed as if it's what happens during the life review, I don't know how it's designed. What happens during the life review is beings that you know, so it could be deceased family members, it could be God, in some cases, again, not describable, but there. It could be Jesus, it could be some other figure that makes you feel comfortable in that experience. So that these beings will help you through your life review. They will help you relive pretty much your entire life almost instantaneously. And you will, and it's one of my favorite stories of a life review was that there was this boy in the Middle East who was going to school, and he was bullying another kid. And this other kid was walking home one day to his parents' house, and he was crying, he was upset, he'd been bullied, he was really, really upset, and lots of negativity coming out of the situation. A lot of pain was inside this little boy. And he got to his parents' house, and his parents were upset. So during this life review, the bullier, the guy that saw this happen, he felt and he experienced all the pain of the person he'd inflicted that bullying against. So as this boy walked home, he was that boy. He felt that pain, he felt that suffering, even to the point when the little boy got to his parents, he felt the pain of his parents. And that negativity ripples out into the universe. Everything is affected by it, everything. And the same positivity as well. And so the life review is not to punish you. This, again, from the data, right? It's purely from the data. This is the way these experiences 99% of the time go. The idea of these life reviews is people don't say, I didn't feel punished. I felt love and I felt supported as I was going through this experience. And the question was asked of me, what could you have done differently in this situation? Where could you have shown compassion and empathy and love in this situation? What could you have done differently? And you ask anybody who had an NDE, a positive NDE, because negative very rarely gets to that point, they will tell you the same thing. I promise you, I guarantee it. If you have someone to show, they will tell you the same thing. The life review is not a judgment. It is a process you go through to relive everything good as well. Like everyone's high-fiving, you did an incredible job of showing love where you did well, but also trying to learn from when you didn't do so well. So that's the life review. And so when people that have negative, so this life review, if you think of it, it's almost like you're purging the negativity, right? So if you think of heaven as this beautiful crystal ocean, this pristine, glittering blue ocean, how would the ocean look if you dropped a huge oil slick right in the middle of it? It's not compatible, right? That kind of natural beauty is not compatible with the destruction or whatever the kind of paradox is in that situation. So if you think of heaven as a place of pure love, how would you get your contempt, your guilt, and your pain? How would that get into heaven? How is that compatible with love? How is it compatible? Where do you pick up all this contempt? Is it in heaven? No, you don't pick. You pick it here on earth. So what happens when you have to go here from earth or wherever you're living your life into heaven, into the afterlife? Well, then it's a negativity. If you can't release that negativity, so whether that's because you didn't have a life review or you just can't let it go, it has to go somewhere, right? That negativity has to go somewhere. You have to go somewhere with all that pain and all that darkness that you're carrying. And so this is where the egregore comes into it, right? And I had to make some leaps a little bit. But if you think of, I mentioned the powerful soul. That's the name of the chapter in the book, the powerful soul, or your powerful soul. You this concept of free will, it kind of popped out at me. The idea that if you combine the power of your soul, and we spoke a bit about some of the abilities that a soul has, again, based on NDE data, not religious, not theological, just purely based on NDE data, the power of that soul has the power to manifest, right? To manifest. So this is not necessarily part of the distressing experiences, but I did explore further the abilities that people had. And that there are some cases, a number of cases where people describe being a soul before they came to earth and having the ability, I don't want to say the power of creation, because that has many religious connotations, but they had the ability to manifest. The scientific term is the best way to describe it. So coming back to the situation where I have all this negativity and this guilt is the main thing that stood out the most. And most people, they said, I didn't feel like I was worthy. Well, the power you have once you leave your body and once you kind of return to your soul, the power you have means that you can determine, you can manifest, right? And so, and then the free will part, which comes into it is, and this is why it's really important that you called out for a saint or for God. If you choose not to see God, then free will entitles you to that. is that's the only way I can think of describing it. If you say, I don't see God, I don't see the light, I don't see love, whatever it doesn't mean that I hate God or I'm, anything like that. It just means I don't feel worthy of seeing God. If you believe that, that's what you'll get. That's what will happen. And it could be.
There is something in the church that is a standing thing. I mean, a lot of people don't realize this, but the church actually teaches today that God doesn't send anyone to hell. We send ourselves there. We send ourselves there through rejection of the grace. And that's consistent with what you're saying. So hold that thought. We're going to take our break here at the top of the hour. When I come back, I've got a question for you, David, about what you just said. It's a complicated one, and I'm sure it's going to take us in some interesting directions. And of course, we'll be taking your questions from the audience as well. So don't go away, everybody. We'll be right back after this.
There is no there, it is cold there, but I am safe and I am warm. Although it's hard, I know I gotta keep up, no time to lay, to drift away. I fill my space, I spend my time down the rabbit hole again, and as I fall I can feel the pain. You can't tell me where to go, so I don't know, I just go with the flow. I go with the flow. I'm falling up, I'm falling down, from the sky and from the ground. Up above just like below, and I don't know where I should go. Lost in between, let's keep on flying, let's keep on breathing. I'm falling up, I'm falling down, from the sky and from the ground. Up above just like below, and I don't know where I should go.
Welcome back, everybody, to the third and final segment of Vestiges After Dark. We are having a fantastic and engaging conversation with our guest, David Gerrelli, tonight about negative near-death experiences. Well, the positive ones, too. We've kind of covered that. I've got a very pressing question that I'm going to ask here in the next hour. And those of you who would like to call in, I know a lot of you like to ask your questions in the chat room. That's fine. But if you'd like to call in and talk directly with us, you can call 718-362-6380. That's 718-362-6380. Enter number, PIN number 855-4111. That's 855-4111 to get placed into the queue. You can also call internationally free on Skype by dialing Skype to Skype, Eye of the Seer, EYEOFTHESEER. And I'll take you on the air. You can ask your question. But we also have the chat room on YouTube. You can use that as well. Jamie Wolf and Brandon Milam are watching like hawks to see what questions are coming in. So we'll be back here in a moment. Don't go away. So, David, as you were talking before the break about the descriptions that your research has unraveled, it leads me to two very interesting conclusions. So it's a bit of a complicated question. So bear with me. I want to get it all out to make sure that we can get a complete answer from you. But from my vantage point, from what you're describing and what your research is describing, sounds almost perfectly like the Catholic concept of purgatory, in the sense that people get out and it is purifying, and it's about facing those imperfections that that remain with us after death, that we have to purge from ourselves in order to be made perfect. All of that is part of the theology of purgatory, not hell. Hell, to me, from Jesus's description, from how it is understood in even the Jewish concept, is more like annihilation. It isn't an experience. It's not a place you go to be tortured for all eternity like Dante's Inferno. It's lights out. It's being wiped out, eradicated, as if you never were. Purgatory, though, would be an uncomfortable experience to purge those last remaining things that we are attached to, so that we can now move into the perfection that is the kingdom of heaven. So in my mind, and I want to hear your answer in a minute, it sounds a lot like that. Now, let's add to it another wrench to this idea. In Buddhism, particularly the Vajrayana school of Buddhism, mostly known to people as Tibetan Buddhism, the Buddhism of the Dalai Lama, for example, they have this wonderful tome called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Thodol. And in that is a full description of the process of death and dying and what to expect. And a lot of their rituals involve even chanting or reading, reciting at the dying person's deathbed these contents, so that they are prepared for the trials and tribulations and challenges of the dying process, which is anything but straightforward. It's anything but clear. It's not like Jesus comes in and just picks you up and takes you home. There's process here. And of course, in Tibetan Buddhism, you don't even have the benefit of a savior. Really, only you can save yourself in Buddhism. So what happens in the Bardo Thodol, which is also very interesting in context to what you're describing here, is that everything, according to this teaching, is an illusion. So even the lights that bring you into the paradise of heaven is an illusion to be avoided. And all of these demons or demonic type things that are eating people alive, like Jamie described, are what are known as wrathful Buddhas, there to actually assist you in removing the attachments to your physicality, so that you can now enter into the blissful state known as parinirvana. Avoiding both the illusions, the pleasant ones and the negative ones, to move and transcend beyond that into the clear light, the truth, which is actually dimmer than all the illusions of the various lights that attract us. Tibetan Buddhism and some schools even teach that light that people see in the positive near-death experience is actually a light that brings you back into the womb of a new person, and you are given rebirth on the karmic wheel of samsara to have to go through suffering and attachment all over again. So it's a complicated question. I'd like for you to perhaps give us insight into your thoughts on this, starting with, of course, what do you think about my contention that this sounds a lot more like purgatory than hell? And then what do you think, how this relates to the concept of the Bardo Thodol in Tibetan Buddhism?
So I did come across purgatory, and I've got a whole chapter on it in the book.
Okay.
And purgatory, and it's interesting because you say it sounds more like purgatory, but actually what I found is that purgatory is the same suffering, the same kind of metaphysical circumstances that will bring you there into purgatory. And there's one, and I've actually got, I picked a number of witness experiences, distress experiences to include in the book, to give that kind of coverage across purgatory and classic hell, as I call it.
All right.
So
right.
Purgatory, it's pretty disturbing to read about, to be honest.
Yeah.
But there was one lady that was in purgatory, and it was almost completely dark. It's almost like a very dimly lit moonlit night, where there's enough light from the moon just to illuminate kind of what's happening around you. And what she saw was this endless line of people, like just raggedy, worn down people walking in single file in a line that went on for eternity, just eternity.
Yeah.
They didn't say a word to each other. They just muttered to themselves over and over again, constantly walking around in this big line of people, this single file line of people, just muttering to themselves. And I came across that more than once. And I never figured out Why would some people have that experience? And it was way less common, by the way, than classic hell.
Really?
So maybe it would help if I can. And again, this is data. This is not my opinion.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
maybe it helps if I get into the egregore component of this entire conversation. Right? We spoke about you can't take your positive, negative. It's always good. Like some people say, you hear the word vibrations a lot, right? When we talk about the metaphysical and spirituality, the idea of vibration comes up. But ultimately, it's positive and negative. And so coming back to the scenario where we pass over, we don't have a positive experience, so we're carrying for whatever reason all this negativity, this guilt. Anything bad that you feel could be considered a negative emotion. Anything you wouldn't think that you would experience in heaven, naturally you wouldn't expect to be afraid in heaven or in pain, right? You
Right.
expect in kind of paradise to have these feelings.
Right.
So the question is, where does that go? And then we come back to that powerful soul. Do you think it's a coincidence that hell is entirely as you'd expect it to be? Demons, fire, brimstone, burning flesh, sulfur, all the things that we think it should be, that we expect it to be, hell is. Heaven is not at all, in many cases, what we expect. Well, it may in some cases, but most of the time, indescribable colors, indescribable sounds, the ability to fly around the universe, all these crazy, honestly, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
The things that happen in these near-death experiences. But there is commonality, which gives us confidence in, or at least gives me confidence in the scientific probability of it being real.
Well, that's one of the rules, right, of science, is that you can duplicate, you can replicate the
observation is a tenet of science. If enough people observe something, then it's, and Dr. Raymond Moody said that in his book.
Yes.
If enough people observe the same thing, then it's scientifically accurate. And that, so 16.5 million people, I would say that's a fairly good
significant,
range of people to say something happened. But coming back to that egregore, so you always spoke about the power of your soul to manifest, right? And I don't know when it started, but let's say, for example, that you can't go to heaven, you have to take that negativity somewhere else, then that's when I came across this concept of an egregore, a thought form. So bearing in mind how powerful a single human soul is, imagine if you've got trillions of them in the same space, all feeling as though that they don't deserve God's love, or they don't deserve love in any way, shape, or form, that they'd had this overwhelming guilt. And that could have come from their life review, which has happened, as I mentioned, a couple of times, not enough to really draw any solid scientific conclusions. But either way, the conclusion I came to is that hell is, and it could be controversial, again, based on the data, it's a creation of humankind. It's that negativity we carry with us. Demons, the demons, I think, is way more complex. I do think there's a whole another story to that. I wasn't able to, there's not enough data to really get to a final conclusion on that. But the idea is that the human soul, with the ability to manifest from the beginning of time, has somehow manifested this space. And because of free will, we're able to deny the light of heaven or the light of God, right?
Right.
But then when people, and I've got a whole series of chapters on what I call saviors, where people call out to Jesus or a loved one, or they pray mostly to God, and they're taken away from this place because the reason they're in the first place is that they don't think they deserve to be there in the first place. And the negativity that they carry, either you go towards the positivity, this is the law of attraction, or you go towards the negativity. So if you carry all this negativity from your life, you can't take that into that perfect serene ocean with you. You've got to either purge it through the life review process, or it's going to weigh you down, and it's going to take you to a place where other people feel the same way you do. Where there are, I say trillions, I don't know the number. I can assume based on the population every year over the past 200 or 300 years, it will be a large number, 5%, right, of the entire population in the last 3 or 4 centuries. It would probably be a large number.
Sure.
So if you think of an egregore, and the concept of an egregore is that every being or every contributor, and let's say souls, as far as we're concerned, every soul that contributes to this egregore empowers it, makes it stronger. Because the other thing you may, and again, anyone who's had an NDE will be familiar with this, positive NDE, anyone who had a positive NDE will know about the concept of the one. When you go to heaven, you connect with everyone and everything all at once. On earth, we're separated from other human souls. We are separate, we're all individual, but not in heaven. In heaven, everybody is together all at the same time. Everybody is one. And that's the best way I can describe it, just one.
Yes.
That doesn't exist in hell. But in many ways, if you think of hell being a corrupted version of heaven, there's still that because you came from one, you find yourself in hell. And this is where this egregore comes from. It kind of, all of the negativity is kind of snowballs. And then if you think about an egregore, the creation, the manifestation, and actually a good example of a relatively modern day egregore is the Nazi Empire. Right? How would everyday regular people get to a point where they felt it was acceptable to commit the atrocities that the Nazis committed?
Right.
The reason is because they were conditioned in an environment where they were told, and everybody around them felt the same way. It's okay to murder people that we don't like, that are different from us, that are below us. I can't remember the exact German word for it. There's a word they have for people they believe to be less than human. And that kind of thinking becomes contagious. And that's a very common, and even the Allies is the concept of an egregore, for liberty and freedom.
Sure.
It's a positive egregore in that scenario. And so if we go back to the concept of hell, human beings, our souls are so powerful. And so when we don't know how to use that power. So when we pass over from a positive point of view, you start to, another thing you hear, and again, you can ask any NDE experiencer, is they start to remember things. As soon as they pass over into their positive experience, they have all the knowledge of the universe almost instantaneously. I remember there was reports of people that had positive experiences. One young boy had a bike accident. He fell off his bike and he fractured his skull on a rock. And as he had an out-of-body experience, he was able to describe the atomic formula of the rocks and the things around him. There was this sudden universal knowledge that existed within him. And this is very common in positive NDEs, this kind of sudden, it's like you always knew it, you just forgot when you came to Earth, and that's very common.
Yeah.
Does not happen in hellish and negative experiences. And I mentioned earlier how positive experiences never have a human form. I've never heard of it. Negative experiences, they always have a human form. So Jamie, you mentioned it happened to you in the void. I've heard of people being torn to shreds by demons still in the operating theater as they're leaving their body, or even whilst they're in their body. Like, demons can appear anywhere.
Well, let me ask you about that while you're on that subject, because again, in the Bardo Thodol, the wrathful Buddhas do that very thing. They consume you, to consume your attachments to your physical self. They consume your physicality so that you're no longer bound to it. And if you can't deal with that, then it doesn't bode well. You end up in a lower karmic cycle and reborn into, again, the same process, which is why in Buddhism, the theology is that you will repeat this countless times until eventually you're able to purge yourself of all attachments, which could take, in Buddhist lore, 3 immeasurable eons usually. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, have you studied the Bardo Thodol? Have you? I
haven't. Not really. I did look into Buddhism though, because a lot of kind of people that had negative experiences convert to Buddhism.
Interesting. After the experience. Interesting.
Yeah. Buddhism is a very, Christianity is the main one, if I'm honest. Most people convert to Christianity after their experience, but the second most popular path is Buddhism. And Buddhism has this concept of constant reincarnation, based on how you performed in your previous life. That does align to much of my research in terms of reincarnation. And again, that's a whole can of worms. That's a rabbit hole I could talk about for a week. But right now, probably don't want to get into that. But ultimately, this concept of constant reincarnation, I think, from what I've learned, or at least what data told us from looking into this whole situation, it was a bit simpler, because a lot of these different versions and denominations of these different religions are different. It all gets quite complicated, in many ways. Yeah. And I think this is the underlying message that I got from the book, was whenever I looked at, and I've been involved in many organizations since then. I'm speaking at the Spiritual Awakenings International Conference in June. And most of my data come from the Near-Death Research Foundation here in the US. And so I've spent a lot of time with these people, but the thing that is most common, and Jamie, this is where I wanted to get to with a question for you, is that people feel they don't deserve. There's some kind of guilt. There's something that makes you feel like you don't deserve to be in heaven. And maybe it's subconscious. Maybe it could be childhood trauma, for example. It could be that you've been conditioned your entire life to believe you're not worthy. of God or love or light or whatever interpretation of whatever religious faith you follow. So I'm really curious here, and I'm sorry if it's a difficult question. You don't have to answer it, but did you feel that maybe do you feel some kind of guilt in your life? And it could be very insignificant.
During that time, I was going through a pretty rough time.
We were just talking about that during the break.
I was going through a pretty rough time in my life. I'd walked away from organized religion, and as a police officer, I was in some specialized units, saw a lot of negative things, and carried that with me, and then dealt with a relationship issue, and I was taking chances. I was not in a good headspace, and then when this happened, I think maybe I just kind of carried some of that with me.
Do you think that you're unworthy of heaven? Or at the time, do you think you may have felt as though you didn't deserve to be, like, do you feel you did a lot
I
wrong?
remember the last thing I said consciously before I got on the chopper was, "God, I'm in your hands." And that's all I could do because I wasn't a practicing Christian at the time. I was raised Christian.
Do you think that might have influenced?
You weren't, but do you think because you weren't a practicing Christian?
I think that I was about to meet my demise and I wasn't prepared for it because I'd walked away from
there you go. There it is, right? So straight away, your preconception going into that situation is, I haven't followed the faith, but I was taught to follow. I don't deserve heaven. So where did you go? You didn't go to heaven, right? So if you think about how powerful your soul is, has the ability to make these decisions, you effectively rejected God. You could say that God rejected you, right? Because you're saying that the teachings, I didn't follow the teachings, therefore I didn't deserve God.
Yeah.
But I mean,
probably had
that's
a lot to do with it. Yeah.
But you didn't, I mean, it was your decision, right? You're the one that believed based on what, and again, it's not your fault, right? And it's no one's fault, but ultimately we are only human, and this is the message of the book, and this is the last chapter in the book. That's again spoiler. It's about loving yourself, right? If you believe, if you believe you don't deserve God, you're turning a blind eye to it, which comes to Brian's point, right? Which is, if you say I don't deserve God, the free will, and this is the conclusions I came to. And again, it's based on data. It's not religious. It's just where it took us. It's where that rabbit hole took us. If you believe you do not deserve that, then that's your choice. That's your free will. You made that choice.
Yeah, I was a very angry person during that time. So
these are the reasons, right? So it's really important that people understand that you're only human. And without, again, coming back to the whole Buddhism thing, which I could talk about for weeks. When you're on this earth,
fall season.
Right,
fall season. Come on back on the show. We'll just do like a series.
yeah. We could do years long series. So I would say, if you're just when we are only human, right? We're not divine, or we don't, at least while we're here on earth, right? So we're going to make mistakes. We're going to mess up. And again, not religious, but the thing that stood out to me the most is the single reason that people go to hell is because that's where they believe they belong. Mm-hmm. They don't believe that they have earned or deserve the love of the light of God or whatever religion they follow. Whatever, I prefer to use the word being, supreme being, the one. I mentioned a few of those generic terms that don't align to any particular religious denomination. Whatever it is, whatever word you want to use, feel free. But ultimately, you have to realize that we are human, and this planet is can I swear on the show?
Yes. Yes. By all means.
Yeah. This planet is a shithole. Like this is a shit place to live.
I think it was a subconscious. I think it was a subconscious weight that I took with me.
I agree. I think it was as well. And and the conclusion I came to was that all you have to do is say, look, Jesus or God, I see you. I don't deserve to be here. I don't want to be here. I've been working with this guy now for about 4 months. He had a distressing experience, unlike anything I've seen before, which is why one of the reasons he's a great guy. I love talking to him just generally, but one of the reasons I'm so fascinated by his story, his name's Mike, is that his experience is unlike anything I've ever seen before or heard about before. And he carried a lot of that guilt, and he didn't realize it. He didn't even see it in his own life. That he's such a nice guy that the slightest thing he felt, I shouldn't be that selfish, or I shouldn't be this, or I shouldn't be that. And it's the same message. You're only human, and what the research pointed in a given direction. I haven't taken in terms of, really investigating heavily. But ultimately, when we're on Earth, we have this opportunity to kind of grow spiritually as well, right? You can't, let me ask you a question. Courage, there's no courage without fear, right? Can we agree on that? There's no courage without fear.
No, absolutely.
There's no bravery without fear.
Right.
Do you think there's fear in heaven? No. So where do you learn about courage? Where do you learn to be brave? Where do you learn to support someone that's going through a hard time, to show love in the most desperate of times? There's only one place you can do that, and that's here on Earth. You're not going to be doing that in heaven. So part of that learning experience means that you are going to pick up some pain, some guilt, and these various things. And that's okay. That's fine. But it's really important to forgive ourselves because we're only human. And as long as we learn from those experiences, hopefully we can take something positive from those experiences. The opportunity to be courageous, the opportunity to show compassion and empathy for somebody that's suffering. You can't do that anywhere else other than here on Earth. It
definitely brings value to the condition that we're in, which again is very Buddhist in the sense that they see the human as the most sacred realm, because it's here that we experience both the positive and the negative, and thus can make the most objective decision towards our own development.
Right, and that experience did change me. I mean, I'm
certainly
still me, but a lot of my friends fell off because I
don't think you'd be here with us though if it hadn't happened.
I mean, I think part of the reason I went through it was to find find us. What questions do we have that from the audience? I don't want to completely ignore them, and I know there's probably some pressing ones. So there's two that I saw. Brandon may have saw another one. One of them's really interesting, although I think it's more of a metaphysical question. Okay. Tay asks, are there gods that control or lead in the parallel universe? So I guess
in the parallel universe.
Parallel universe, I guess maybe on the other side.
Okay.
Is there a ruling class on the other side?
It's a really interesting question.
Keep religious
like a polytheistic kind of thing, like many gods. Is that what they're asking?
Maybe.
Okay.
Non-religious question. I think
it's a good genuine question, right? Like, is there many religions? I mean, in fact, Christianity and Catholicism are quite unique in terms of one God.
Yeah, right? Monotheism is pretty rare. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's typically there are many gods involved in many situations. So what I found is that no, there was only ever one ultimate being, and I won't use the word God, but there was only ever one ultimate being. But what I did learn, which was incredibly interesting to me, let's start with the positive side, is that there seems to be a kind of levels that souls have depending on their experiences, which is why I mentioned, based on certain points, experience you've had on Earth, your soul may be more experienced than others, depending on the kind of suffering and pain or recovery or whatever, or empathy or compassion you've lived in. So there's many NDEs where people that have an near-death experience meet other souls that they instantaneously know are wiser or more authoritative than them, but not in a negative way. Like there was one particular experience I read about where there was this book, and this is also very common, which is interesting. Lots of people have NDEs and they get told the meaning of life. They get told about the future of Earth and humanity, but they don't remember that when they come back. They just know they were told the answer to these things. They don't remember the answer, which is the researchers incredibly frustrating that you knew the meaning of life and you knew where humanity was heading, but you can't tell me because it was taken away from you when you come back. So that happens quite frequently. So there are experiences where people remember, I was shown something, but then I wanted to take it further with what I was shown, but my soul wasn't at a level where I could absorb that knowledge or I could understand that or learn it. I wasn't allowed to see it, almost like a top secret classification that I'm not allowed to be involved in. And what it's indicated to me after some research is there are various levels of souls that have various levels of experience. So, for example, Brian, you could be, eons more advanced than I am in terms of my soul, but we wouldn't know that here on Earth, right? Because we're equals in terms of we're both humans. But you could be billions of years more advanced than me, for example. And again, there's no time or space in heaven or the afterlife, but you could be. So you just don't know. But when positive NDEs occur, it's quite routine. They will talk about, I met a soul that was way more, and also many spirits or angels or entities or whatever you want to call them, they appear bigger and more radiant than other ones, than yourself in most cases. So there does seem to be some hierarchy in the afterlife, but it's not a command structure, because again, that would imply some kind of control, which does not exist as far as I can tell in heaven. In hell, there's a command structure. Rarely there seems to be a command structure. So Jamie, you mentioned the dark being inside of the room, right?
Yes,
You
and
saw some kind
That
of dark
told you,
being.
that ordered demons to attack you.
yes, he ordered the demons to quote punish her.
Yeah. And that again is more common than you may think. I was very surprised to learn of a command structure in hell. And it's not common, but it does exist. I'll be honest with you, so it was a fascinating concept. In terms of multiple gods, no, I never came across multiple gods. I never came across the one, also known as God, or I assume that's what it is.
Well, I mean, that's consistent with what I believe also in terms of not just, spiritually my own religion, but also, when you look at what people consider to be the largest polytheistic religion on the planet, and the oldest, incidentally, is Hinduism. But when you really get into the theology of Hinduism, they're really not polytheistic. It's actually quite monotheistic, and perhaps in extreme sense, in the sense that the only real true God is Brahman. And all of these multiple deities are expressions or emanations that are experiential encounters with Brahman through the lens of these various things like Ganesh or Shiva or Krishna, all these other different variations. Yeah, Vishnu. Vishnu is kind of like the Krishna's an emanation of Vishnu, I believe. So it makes sense in what you're saying, David, because it looks like what we have with theology, and this is something I've always taught my students, and I even teach, sometimes even from the pulpit. Our experience with God, at least in terms of Scripture, in terms of what the Bible says, or what any particular scripture says, and how that's interpreted, is a faith account. It's one man's or several individuals' experience with God through the lens of their own understanding, written down to share what they encountered with the rest of us. It is never, except with the only exception being the Quran, because Muslims consider that to be a direct dictation. But most of every other religion, with the exception perhaps the Ten Commandments, that would be a direct encounter with God too. But other than those two anomalies, most religions consider their holy books to be expressions of faith accounts. They're not infallible in that sense. They are how that individual who wrote it down encountered God through the lens of his understanding, which is very much what we're talking about here. And there seems to be a consistency that perhaps some of these things that we're talking about, like he was talking about, David, you're talking about the other levels, like there's like levels of understanding, advancements and whatnot. That could be how the Eastern religions interpret reincarnation, in the sense that it's not a soul reincarnating as much as it is the development or advancement of that individual through the lens of multiple people's experiences that all share that same spiritual condition. I've always felt that soul families was a thing.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think sometimes what we are interpreting as the same person coming back multiple times is actually, no, you get your one life, but the soul that animates you might experience reality through several different individuals that all share that same soul family, for lack of a better word. So it's all very interesting. What's our next question? Actually, let's see if Brandon has one, and then we'll go to the one that you have there, Jamie. Brandon, did you notice any in there that haven't been covered yet?
That's the only question I noticed was the one that you had just covered with the parallel universe.
Okay. Do you have any of your own before we move on to the second one? I mean, you are sort of like the avatar of questions. So I mean,
he discovered a Nokian tonight. So he's got a lot of homework.
Yeah, he's got a lot of homework to do.
Well, I do have one. Just one for right now.
Go for it.
Does a person's religion affect how they perceive a near-death experience to be? So would, say, a Christian experience a near-death experience a lot different than, say, an atheist or just any other religion, would they all be the same experience?
Well,
Or
it
would they
sounds like
have
David's
different
saying that they're very consistent amongst different groups. Am I right,
Yeah,
David?
it doesn't matter.
They are. The answer is yes and no. So they are consistent, but if you expect to, if as long as that being, whoever you expect it to be, existed and wasn't just made up, right? Like Jesus, I believe very strongly that Jesus existed because Jesus is a reoccurring character, a very reoccurring figure over and over again in near-death experiences. So it's pretty indisputable that Jesus existed. And also he possesses a very strong illumination, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So people feel, so there's definitely something special about Jesus in terms of, again, not religion. I know he's special in the Bible, obviously, but even in the research, Jesus does stand out a lot. I mentioned the guy from Korea earlier on, right? So he comes from an Asian background. So he felt most comfortable and most divine in an experience where he saw Asian palaces, and that was the experience he had. So if you think of, if I'm an entity that is going to welcome you back into the afterlife or into heaven, and I want you to feel comfortable, I want you to, because it's a distressing experience, dying, right? Like Jamie knows, dying is a very distressing experience.
It's not one I'd want to probably have to have.
On a regular basis, right? Yeah. So you want to make that reception as comfortable as possible for people that are going through that.
Sure.
And so if a divine intelligence, if a infinitely intelligent intelligence was able to understand everything about you, it stands to reason that they would decide to give you an experience that makes you feel most comfortable. So it's not uncommon. Again, I've never seen it, to me, it always appears that the beings that appear to them are either close family members, a religious figure. I've only ever come across religious figures that are very common. There are a lot of kind of fringe religious characters I've never seen before.
Really?
Like Yoda's not going to turn up. Yeah, Yoda. I mean, there's people like Jedi, by the way, is a registered religion in the United Kingdom.
Yes.
Yoda's not going to turn up.
Yes, it is.
Because he's a fictional character. Yeah, it is, yeah.
No, it's real. They've actually made it an actual religion.
On route to the UK.
Yeah, no, I'm not kidding.
Yep.
Yeah, because enough people, during the census, enough people responded saying, I'm a Jedi, as their religion, and therefore it became a religion.
Do you think, David, it's an archetype that's being created, another egregore?
Yeah.
Potentially, yeah. I think anything where multiple, and again, going back to the power of the soul, enough people believe something, then it can manifest as an egregore.
Yeah.
I think because we are tethered to these very frail, limited human bodies, and it's interesting you mentioned a soul family. That was a concept I came across.
Oh, really? I mean, I'd be interested to hear more about that if you wouldn't mind.
When I say a soul family, I had this concept that the life you're walking right now is you're tethered to your soul back in heaven. Mm-hmm. So you walk this earth, and only a fraction of your soul exists in the body that you occupy today. Mm-hmm. And that's the experience you're having. But your soul may be experiencing multiple lifetimes in various different places. Yes. Your soul is tethered to, and they all kind of recombine.
Yes.
But it gets a bit fringy at that point. I don't really have a lot of data to back it up.
That would be hard, to collect.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I can't, but I did come across it, and it did pass a Grayson scale, and it was scientifically validated. Oh, wow. So there's something to it, but you can't investigate every single thing that you come across because, as I said, there's just too much. It's mind-boggling to comprehend what is happening when people die and what they see, what they experience, and trying to bring it all together. But one thing that is consistent throughout every single positive experience is it's a beautiful story. It's always a beautiful, reassuring story with no negativity involved whatsoever. And that's the kind of contrast between hellish and positive. There is such a huge contrast. I mean, the thing about studying this field, which has been fascinating, if you talk to any person that had a positive or negative experience, typically what you hear first is, I'm not afraid to die anymore because I know there's more.
Yeah, I'm not either.
Is here today. No, exactly right. Because you know there's more.
Right. A matter of fact, I've kind of been questioned because I've had a lot of deaths happen recently in the last few years, family, and
previous colleagues too.
And previous colleagues, a lot of previous colleagues. Yeah. Cops die earlier than the rest of us. Yes. And it hits me. It's sad, but I know that it's not the end. And I've not been openly accused, but I've had people say, "Aren't you upset?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, but it's just beginning for them. I've had a taste of it. They'll be fine."
Oh, they're in a way better place than where you are right now.
Yeah, I don't cry. You know, I had to bury my grandmother last year. I just lost my uncle, and I was sad, but I was kind of happy for them too. And so, you know, people that haven't had the experience I've had with a near-death experience, I don't think they kind of understand it. They kind of think I'm being cold, but I'm not. I'm actually.
I understand.
It's a completely
it.
different. I know you do, but a lot of people don't. They think that you're trying to be cold or that your emotion's dead, but no, just the opposite, actually.
Yeah.
I wish everyone could feel the way you do. I wish everybody could understand or feel as though everybody that's ever left them in their life, they're going to see again, right? There's a difference between faith and knowing for sure. There's a difference, right?
Oh yeah.
So you know, like you're sure you've seen it.
I had just a little, just a taste of it to know that it'll be all right.
And I get that. I've been fortunate enough through the research to have that awareness, I would say, and I feel the same way. And so and you know, there's a lot of times where people that have had near-death experiences and people that haven't get divided into two camps, which is fair, because if you've had an NDE, it's very difficult to describe that to somebody that hasn't had an NDE. And many a time when people that haven't had an NDE, they dismiss it as hallucinations, and there's that kind of pessimism around it.
Absolutely.
So when you're all in on there being, whether it's heaven or continuation of consciousness or whatever it may be, the idea that you'll see others on the other side that you loved at some point in your life, but they left you for whatever reason, you know, for whatever kind of situation, that's very reassuring. And so even for me, even if I don't talk to people that I was friends with for years, you know, I'm getting old now, I'm 45. You know, there's people that were my world 20 years ago, I haven't spoken to in 20 years, but I'm going to see them again anyway. You know, I know that for certain, for sure. That's a very liberating feeling to have, to know that you will always see everybody you ever loved again. And so that's very liberating. And so there are many consequences of getting into this kind of field of research. I mean, obviously we spoke a lot about the scientific concepts and everything, but just from a kind of humanity point of view, it changes you. It really does change you.
It changes you.
And when you spend time with them.
It makes you more, what's the word? Empathetic,
empathic, I think, is a good way to put it.
And you care more. You see things in a different light.
Well, most
really
of
matter.
most of the research I've read,
nicer to people.
I've been very limited in what I've researched in this compared to you, David. But what I have read, it's that people that have at least the positive experience, well, even the negative ones, they come back changed. They come back a better person. They are more appreciative of life, and it sort of becomes a life-affirming experience. And the one thing that seems to be consistent for all of them is that the fear of death completely goes away. They just don't have it anymore.
Yeah, it's pretty much gone.
Yeah. What's our next question?
Well, Not Sure had a question up thread, and it was, I think we may have touched on it before. He's wanting to know if there's some kind of meditation technique that can get us to this plane of existence. I guess maybe just to see if we can
see it.
To see it.
Well, I mean, astral projection and out-of-body experience have seem to have a similarity with the near-death experience, but I don't know if that's the same thing. What do you think, David?
Yeah, you know, I actually did some experimentation with meditation. I did some microdosing with mushrooms at one point.
Oh, did you?
Ayahuasca?
Yeah. I did that because I read that would absolutely connect me with the other side.
Yeah.
My problem is that so there's a part of your brain called the ego center of your brain, and it identifies who you are as a person. So it anchors you to earth and to you as a person. So I read and have since validated that in order for people to be able to experience beyond who they are, you to be able to get to the other side, to the astral plane, you have to let go yourself. This is very important. You have to numb the noise. You have to mute the noise around you.
Shut down the ego.
Shut down the ego. Yeah. That part of your brain has to be shut down.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, then you can absolutely drift to the other side. It's the thing. It's that sense of self that what we call it, it's not ego, by the way, it's called the ego center, but it's got nothing to do with ego. It's your identity, who you are as a human being, who you are as a person. If you can silence that part of you, then, and you can just be one with everything, you can just blank your mind, which was hard for me because my brain is like a nuclear fusion reactor. It's just
well, you're very left
floating.
brain. I mean, in your approach to science and everything. So I'd imagine that's more difficult. Yeah,
it is super difficult. It's a disadvantage, and I acknowledge that. It's hard for me to let go. It's hard for me to meditate. I've only done it once, and when I did do it, it was quite successful. If you want to get to that place, study the various forms of meditation. I wouldn't suggest microdosing, by the way. That's something they're doing over in Australia at the moment.
Yeah.
That's why I was involved in it. They're doing some experiment. It treats depression and various other things.
Yeah, ayahuasca's getting popular over here.
Yeah, I would. These things control environment. Just for now, regular meditation is the best way to go. Try and meditate, silence your mind, and just even the most simple form of meditation can take you to a different place.
It's a process.
And it's proven to be, absolutely. It's proven to be effective.
I find that meditation seems to be the foundation to a lot. I mean, even prayer in the church, when you really get into the mechanics of it, again, removing the belief system from it, removing the theology and the religious associations and meanings, what you're really looking at scientifically as a mechanic is a type of meditation. And that's where I think the magic is, so to speak, because, when you look at the saints, and there have been numerous saints that have had visions or, encounters with where they've been able to peek into heaven. I even had an experience when I was younger that was this same thing. And it was very much interesting to hear you talk about, David, the colors that you couldn't describe, because that's exactly what I saw in this experience. Now, I wasn't dying, and I wasn't sick, and I wasn't taking any kind of mind-altering substance. It was just an encounter that happened. I wasn't even meditating at the time. It sort of spontaneously occurred, and it was life-changing. It brought me to the path that I now walk. I would never have considered religious life if it had not been for that experience. But it gave me a peek, if only for just a briefest of seconds, to see into the kingdom of heaven. And it was life-changing in that moment. Everything about, so it was kind of like a near-death experience in the same sense that I saw something that I couldn't explain that stayed with me, and it was exactly the words you said resonated in my brain, and I haven't been able to forget them since you said them, and that is, it's more real than it is here. That's exactly what this was like. Yes, the colors that you can't describe, all these other things, but ultimately the thing that was the most pressing part of this experience for me was that it was more real than what I'm like right now talking to you, doing this show. This is more dreamlike, infinitely more dreamlike than that experience I had for just 2 or 3 seconds, or at least what seemed like 2 or 3 seconds. It was profound. It was again, life-changing. There's other saints that have had much more detailed, longer encounters with this, that they've described similar things to this. There is a connection, and you don't need to die to have it. It is, I think, what you said, David, perfectly. Just sort of dismissing that attachment to self so that you can get outside into the larger reality. I think we are limited by our attachments, and that's what confines us to only the things that we can tangibly recognize, but we miss the larger picture because we're so stuck here. So as soon as you're able to kind of free yourself, and it's interesting that it's easier when you're younger to do this, because as you get older, you form more distractions, and you form more attachments as the result of those distractions. So my God, what a fascinating direction. This one show's not enough, David. I hope you're willing to do more.
I'm happy to come back.
It's either that or we're here till 1 a.m.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they would let us do that. But
just real quick, Brian, what you had. So there's two, and I haven't really got into this other realm of research, but there's near-death experiences, and there's another experience called a spiritually transformative experience.
Okay,
there you go.
That's it.
And they're taken very seriously in the whole NDE kind of afterlife. So people that have these experiences, at first I was very skeptical about it.
Yeah.
But I've been doing some research into it lately, and it's very much aligned to NDEs as well. There's a lot of crossover between NDEs and STEs. So it's something I'll be looking into, but it's quite possible that you had an STE. If it changed your life,
it did.
Almost certainly that's what it was.
Oh yeah, I wanted to be an investment banker. I had no interest in religious life. I wasn't raised religiously. I barely believed in God through much of my life. So, or my early life. So to have this and become a bishop like I am and doing the work that I do now is it would have been crazy to me back then. It was that experience that created this shift, and it was radical. Just
if you would have told me
that you'd be doing what you do
15 years ago, I'd be doing what I'm doing now, I would have laughed in your face and said, "What are you smoking?"
Yeah,
so,
exactly. It's the way it is.
It
David,
changes you.
we got 1 minute. I'd like for you to just tell the audience where they can find out more about you, your book, any websites or ways to reach you, anything you'd like to share.
Okay, so the book is available, as you said earlier, at the top of the show. It's available everywhere. Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, wherever you kind of go for your books, it's available there. I am speaking at the Spiritual Awakenings Institution in June. So if you can make it, that would be great. But yeah, I mean, it's always a pleasure to speak to you guys. I want to thank you for inviting me on the show.
You are
a wonderful guest. Thank you.
You have earned the award of having an open invitation. I would always welcome you back, and we would love to get you set up for the fall season to talk more about this. Certainly, there's just not enough time on one show to cover it all.
I agree. There's many things we could talk about, but I really appreciate it, guys. And Jamie, thank you for sharing your experience. I really want you to know that.
Well, thank you for trying to get the answers we all are looking for. I appreciate you.
And I can see from
every day.
I can see from the comments in the chat room too that you really blew some people's minds tonight, David. So thank you so much for coming on. We are going to be back next week with a brand new episode. Open lines, open topics. I know you guys love that one. Okay, so hopefully Father Chris can be there for the entire show. But Brandon will be there, I'm sure. And we will be covering whatever is on your mind. That's your show. And you just tell us what you want us to talk about, and we will cover it. Until then, I want to say thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us for this 3 hours tonight. Thanks to our guests. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Father Chris. And we'll see you next week. But until then, out there in the ether, good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.